having a lot of fun. Make sure that you don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and go share the stream real quick before we get started. And I guess I'll just say hello, Jason and Andrew. Thanks again for being here as always. Good stuff to talk to you guys and just have fun with everybody and chat about game dev stuff. So I think we've got a couple different things that we wanted to talk about today. I noticed in chat before we even started, people were already asking about your audio recommendations, Jason, because you talked about using Master Audio before, and people are curious about like in-depth audio tutorials and stuff. And it reminded me earlier today, I had the architecture show Q&A call, and there was actually a big question about doing audio stuff in there. It seems like something that doesn't get covered or talked about a lot, like how to set up big audio systems and do it in like a real game when you do it. Because I think most of the time, correct me if I'm crazy, but most of the time audio is just kind of like an afterthought that gets kind of slapped into a game at the last second, or near the last second, or when the sound guy comes around, or when QA goes, hey, there's no sound effects, something like that. So that would be an interesting one. I also wanted to talk about RTS development. I've been doing a little bit of that today. And then whatever other stuff you guys want. Is there anything big, pressing, important you guys have in mind that you wanted to just discuss today?
Nothing comes. The only thing that comes to mind for me is I want to recommend a Unity game I played and finished. So that's one recently enough.
Oh, that'll be exciting. I'd check that out. And Andrew, you said you released a new character or something?
We're working on a new character. A dragonling is what we're calling it. Basically a dragon man character with armor and stuff. But it's exciting because we haven't done new characters in a while. We've been working on environments. And so we got to the point where the model's ready to just gain it textured, and that's always fun. It'll be a bit before we get animated and rigged and all that, but it's good to have that in the pipeline because we've been doing environments for so long that it's been quite a bit since we got a new character.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Is it going to be low poly or high poly, or what kind of character?
High poly.
Nice. Uh-oh, we lost Andrew. Just disappeared right out of the stream. All right, I'm sure he'll be back. Better be high poly. Hopefully there'll be a low poly version of it too. All right, is he back? There we go. We got him back in.
Yeah, high poly, high fidelity.
All right. Sweet. Oh, that would be cool. And I assume you can just make a low poly version if you decide to later, right?
That's what we had been doing before, yeah. So we might keep doing that.
Nice. Cool. Well, there was a question here. Is there a good solution for using JavaScript in Unity? I want to answer that before we continue on. The answer is no, I would say. You probably don't want to use JavaScript in Unity. If you're thinking about it, just get familiar with C#. You'll see that it's very similar and not more difficult. I'm going to switch everybody around so we're all looking in the right direction. Yeah, but it's not more difficult to learn C#. So I would say don't worry too much about trying to figure out a way to get JavaScript in there. Just use C#. Unless you've got sometimes people have a very specific project where they need to insert some JavaScript from something because of some corporate or enterprise requirement for a thing that they've got. If you're in that case, I have no idea what the solution is. Jason, you know anything that does that? Allows you to just run some arbitrary JavaScript inside of Unity?
So there is there's a whole load of cross-compilation tools out there. It really depends what you're looking to do. There's like Crosscode and Bridge.net and a bunch of other different things. It really depends what your goal is. But yeah, if it's like doing a compiler to compile code for the sake of it, you can. But honestly, I wouldn't really recommend it. It's really hard to know a good answer without knowing what your use case is. But I would say, as a general rule, try and avoid. Like if you're looking for a scripting language in your project, pick Lua. Lua is much easier to use, learn, and teach people as like a quick internal scripting language for a project if you want to parse and process it. If it has to be JavaScript, make it a web app. Don't bother using Unity if it's going to be web technologies. It's always best to lean in the technology stack that you're using for stuff. But if you can avoid JavaScript, then do that instead, because JavaScript has a lot of reasons why you probably don't want to use it. Again, unless you're in web stuff, in which case it makes sense.
Yeah. That's the only thing I can think of is if you needed to run some web thing, you needed to host some web thing that was running JavaScript. But you can run I believe there's ways to run a Chromium browser in Unity. I haven't done it in a long time, but I've seen people do it. So it is possible to just pop up a browser and run some of that. I don't know how much of the JavaScript actually works in there, though.
And you can also send messages back and forth. So here's a fun fact. If you want a really quick way to solve that problem, is if you make a WebGL build, your Unity build will be ran in a browser window inside of a HTML file, and you can send messages back and forth through the JavaScript to Unity and back. So if you wanted like a WebGL app where there's some dials and sliders and things on the page that affect the Unity game, you can do that. It's just, again, do you want to do that? Is that really a goal, or is that just, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something I've seen it done though for certain games. Like I said, there are definitely use cases. There was a question too that did pop up earlier in the game architecture call that I did want to bring up to you, Jason, because I thought maybe if anybody you would have a good answer for it on localization. So for localizations, when you have a game and you want to release it in a bunch of different countries and you want the text to kind of like auto convert, or like, you switch to German and all the text is in German, or Chinese and it's all in Chinese. And they were asking if you had some suggestions on what to use. And it looks like here they're looking at the L2 localization asset. Curious if you had any other recommendations. And I've used a couple of them in the past. I don't remember them by name or anything, or have any strong preference on them because I didn't use them that much. We had to localize a couple little things here and there in a bunch of games. And the ones where we had to do a bunch, they were all custom stuff before Unity. So do you have any thoughts, recommendations on these?
Well, for me, it's a matter of scale. Normally, when a project starts off, it's one language, and then someone asks to add a second language. In that case, I usually just write my own simple scriptable object thing, very easy key tag based solution. If you want an example of how to do something like that, the channel GameDev Guide has a really nice series on making your own localization system with some nice editor tooling. That'll get you started. And honestly, that'll do for most small projects. If you're getting into the point where you're hitting like 7 countries and 8 countries and you want to cover your bases, just use L2. Like that's where at that stage it saves you the time and effort of making your own system. But I find you don't need to normally. Like I try to avoid bringing in the kitchen sink if I don't need an entire huge asset solving one problem. And oftentimes, if it's just literally, dictionary of strings, pick this one under this case and this one if it's this case, you can just write that yourself in a simple class. You don't need to bring in a whole library for that.
And L2 that's one that you've used? It sounds
I've used
familiar.
L2. Okay. L2 is good. I would say though, here's one tip: if you are using L2 has this nice magic button that uses an auto translator to translate your text into different languages. Don't use it. Don't ever use that feature. If you're building a game with something you care about, some project you plan to release, don't use auto-generated nonsense translations. We've all seen this. If you translate a sentence from one language to another and then back to the original language, suddenly the grammar's wrong. There are services out there, or Fiverr or something, where you can find people who will literally translate for a small fee. You're looking at between $15 to $30 to have a decent chunk of text translated. If you care about your project, and maybe not for a whole game, obviously, there's a different story there, how you might handle that. But if it's just UI and you're trying to deal with all of your UI text and things, just pay to have it properly translated. There are services out there to do it, and think of how amateur it'll feel to you when you use a product, and you can tell it's probably a foreign country because all of the grammar is just off slightly, and it really lowers your opinion of the software. So don't do that to yourself for other people. So it's a small fee. Invest in your own project if you are doing localization. Or one tip, if you're going larger than that, if it's building a game and you've got a big community and you set up a Discord and all that stuff, set up a Google Sheets document with shared access rights with all of the text dialogue in one side, and then deputize people in your community as you trust them to come in, and people who offer to do translations for you in their native language can do that. And then when you're done, you can read that Google Sheets file into your game and then use that as your data source. That's a great way to crowdsource it. But again, you need to have a community for it. Either way, don't use Google Translate or Babelfish or any of that. Just rely on people for that, trust me. Plus, you want localization too to be colloquial. That's another thing too. If you use natural translations, you're going to get sentences which are clinically the same, but that doesn't often work, right? In different countries, people say things differently with different cultures and different kind of subtext, and so you want people to translate it into. If your character is like a 20-something person, you want it to sound like a 20-something from that culture or that era or that whatever. And so asking somebody who can actually put in the right slang is probably more valuable to you than actually one-to-one matching the dialogue you wrote. anyway, that's a whole side topic. But yeah.
No, I think that's really good advice. I really like the part on just crowdsourcing it too. I've seen that work pretty well in the past, where people have fans that are. I've even seen people from languages that weren't going to be supported just reach out and say, "Hey, I'd like to offer the ability to translate this into this other language. I'll give you all the translations if you give me the source." So it's definitely a cool thing to do, and definitely better than the auto translations. Right? There was a question about optimizing WebGL loading times. I don't know anything about optimizing those. I don't know if either of you guys do. If not, I'll bug Rocco about it later. Maybe
Well,
he knows.
just loading scene times in general, or
Probably the loading time of the game in
WebGL.
WebGL. I'm not sure how
Oh,
you optimize.
yeah. Well. So the unfortunate truth is WebGL is a pain in the ass for that, and that's because you're basically like you're loading the entire project down onto their machine, right? That's just what you're doing. The best you can do is treat it like the difference between um, single page web apps and sort of the older static page apps, which is if you want your game to load faster, then simply have less data in it. I know this sounds weird to say, but have your game lightweight, have it open and install quickly, and then use asynchronous loading, like use a web API or something, and then pull down the data and then build stuff after the fact. So the truth is, if your project's loading slowly, you just have to offload the timing on that. Don't build it into the project. Make the project lighter weight so it opens up faster. This is an old trick we used to do with Flash websites. So before all the modern HTML5 stuff, if you wanted dynamic web pages, it had to be Flash. And Flash had this giant loading bar and it was tedious. And a lot of websites, you'd load the website and you'd have to wait like nearly a minute for the web page to load all of its rubbish assets. And so the smart people would do is they would have the project open empty, and then they would have a bunch of external sites where they would, or a bunch of external resources that they would load through a WebGL and then load them into the project as it's running. So you can at least launch them onto a flat page. And in fact, if you want a web analog for this, if you've got a page with scripts on it, so standard web page like this one, like Google or YouTube or whatever, you'll notice what a lot of professional web developers will do is the CSS will be at the top of the file, because that you want that to load before the page loads, so it loads in well drawn. But the scripts are loaded at the bottom of the file, so the page doesn't load empty. If you load the scripts at the top, the page will flash white for a second while it waits for the scripts to load. But if you load the page with the CSS first, the styles will load in, and then the scripts will load afterwards, after you've already got content on screen. So as a general rule, let things load in visually and then have the longer form stuff load afterwards. So yeah, I would say offload what you can, do a couple of web API calls. If you want to look into AWS Lambdas, that's a really simple way to set up some data providers without much effort to load extra content into your project.
Yeah, lambdas and just pulling down the models and stuff as binary data and as through addressables or resource something.
Yeah.
Nice. There was a question. Do you care not to show private URLs during your live streams to the end? I wanted to pull that up because the answer is no. And last time I did, and I had to go go make it private, accidentally sharing the wrong URLs. There was a question about DLSS technology compatibility with Unity. I don't know anything about that. I didn't know if you do.
So I don't, unfortunately. I'm not up with how those change. They change so often; it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, I wanted to jump to this next one about multi-scene workflows, though. It says, I recently watched GameDev Guide's second newest video where he talks about multi-scene workflows. Is this something you use professionally and recommend? I haven't seen his video on it yet, but I'm going to go watch that after that. I'm going to queue it up. But yes, multi-scene setup is something I almost always use and pretty much generally just recommend. If your game is getting big and it's beyond something that is simple and tiny and fits into a single little scene box, I would definitely split into multiple scenes. At the very least, separate out your maps and your levels into separate scenes. Sometimes separate out some set of systems. Usually I'll go with 2 to maybe 3. I have seen, like, there are some games that I've worked on and seen where, like, the whole level is split into multiple scenes too, if the levels are very large and complex with different layers of things in different scenes. Things like an entire separate scene for particle effects, an entire separate scene for placed objects and things like that, so that it's easier to merge and change those things without having a big conflict. But yeah, multi-scenes is definitely something you'll want to get used to using and working with, I think.
Yeah, and if you're doing that, though, something to keep in mind is actually funny. I had this conversation with somebody earlier this week. A friend of mine, Evan, was working on a game, and he was saying he's using multi-scene loading, and his character is dropping through the floor because the loading order doesn't work in the case where the character is landing on it. And so the tip I gave to him was, if you call scene manager.load async, it returns something called an async operation. And an async operation has a flag on it called is done. And you can check if it is done to see if that operation is finished loading. So what you can do is, if you create a list of async operations, whenever you call the load async, save the resulting return value from that into your list, and you'll have a list of all of the async operations. Then start a coroutine, iterate that list, and go for each. Now you can actually use a link statement for this. The link statement is just all. So if async operations dot all and then is done, effectively do whatever it is you want then. So if there's a particular thing like place the character on the ground, you can ensure that the loading of all the scenes is in first. But to take my own advice from a second ago, if ideally you don't want to wait till everything has to load in, if you can have a hierarchical order. So what some people do if they're building a multi-scene system is they're smart about it and they actually have it in tiers. So if you're using it as a core fundamental thing for your game, you kind of want to have 3 phases, right? The required, the middle stuff, and then the end stuff. And that way you can load in the ground planes, drop in your player quickly, and then load in the mid and the foreground stuff that's sort of afterwards. So that way you can have the gameplay in as fast as possible. So you could split your multi-scene loading so it's into like multiple different tiers. So it really comes down to whether how much effort you want to put into building that system. But effectively splitting it up will probably make it easier for you.
Yeah, I found it always makes it easier, except for those loading issues where you end up falling through, or lighting issues when people first start dealing with it and they get confused about what's going on there. Outside of that, though, I found that having multiple scenes, now that it's easy to work with and easy to do in the editor, it's super valuable. So, isn't C# too slow for MMO games? No, and it all compiles down to the pretty much the same stuff anyway. I thought that was a fun one to pop up. Is there a marketplace for hiring artists, Andrew?
There are likely more than what I use. I have had the best luck with CG Trader, actually. I think CG Trader does a really wonderful job of basically creating that market because they have a built-in escrow system. So, one of the biggest problems for both parties when hiring an artist is the trust level. You've got to trust who's hiring you is going to actually pay you at what they promised, and you got to trust that who you're hiring is actually going to deliver the quality that they are advertising through their portfolio. And I think I've been burned personally. One of my first experiences when making my game The Barbarian years and years ago was an artist who just took my money and ran. Essentially, he delivered some really poor quality stuff. Out of 3 milestones, only the first milestone, and I couldn't do anything with it. And I ended up having lost my first chunk of change. So, I've also heard many stories of artists being burned by the devs, either with feature creep and saying, I'm not going to pay you until you add this. Now you have to add this, or just not paying at all, just saying thanks. And then suddenly the money never comes through. CG Trader has an escrow program. If there's a conflict, they'll basically figure out who should be paid. And I've had a couple experiences where I've gotten my money back because the quality of the work just was not what I had been promised. So I think CG Trader is great. I know Unity now has a jobs on their forums again, so that could be a decent location as well, but there's no escrow system, so you do have to work on the trust and figure out what works there. But
yeah, I found that Unity jobs forum to be good in the past, so I wouldn't be surprised. What other ones do you use other than CG Trader? Do you ever use any alternatives?
I've tried Fiverr, but for 3D models, I have not had much luck at this point. Every once in a while, I feel like I should try again, just because of all the YouTube videos about Fiverr, and I think their affiliate program might be to play there. But there's that. There's I've looked at ArtStation and stuff, trying to hire people, but a lot of people on ArtStation aren't really interested in doing for hire work necessarily, and they don't always reply. So it depends on the amount of effort I want to put out in order to get one person to talk to me. And that's where I keep going back to CG Trader, because you can either invite direct people or just put it out for everybody and just get a whole bunch of submissions and go through that. And yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to try CG Trader. I've used Upwork to do something similar in the past, and I found a couple of good artists on there. Fiverr had been kind of the same. Like it's a big crapshoot. You see one thing on there, and you may get something that looks like that. You might get something that looks totally different. And a lot of the places on there I've noticed are like agencies. So they're hiring. They have multiple artists there, so the quality of the artists varies dramatically too. Even ordering from the same person sometimes. So
that you mentioned agencies. That's one thing that, especially on Unity jobs, would happen a lot. I would get people from various countries saying, "Hey, we are a team of 30 people, and we can produce your project." And I've never gone forward with any of those agencies. I've thought about it. I've taken a few steps with one or two, but it always comes back for me thinking like, okay, obviously there's a middleman here, right? Especially in a country where they don't speak English too much, and I don't speak any other language, so it helps that the middleman speaks both languages. There's a value there, but I always worry that this middleman is also trying to get as much money out of me as possible, and then paying the artists as little as possible. And that part always scares me. So I've stayed away from agencies, but then at the same time, I always think it does seem like you might get a more stable quality if it's leveled out for an agency. But
I don't know. I saw less stable quality because it just like seemed to get thrown to whatever random person.
Okay.
Like sometimes it'd be great, and I'm like, wow, and then they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, I've worked with a few companies that have ended up hiring groups like that, and here's from my experience anyway, is what tends to happen is in some countries it's hard to find work, and so what they do is they have somebody creates a firm like that, and they'll just hire literally anybody, and they don't really care who. And so sometimes it's actually really talented people who are just starting out, other times it's not, and so you're going to get whatever person happens to be there at the time. And then what tends to happen is they're sort of a mill for people. So they treat the employees pretty harshly, and they'll kick them out if they're not producing work or whatever. So that means it's technically good for you, because what happens is they'll on a dime, if someone provides work that you don't like, they'll happily fire that person and bring someone else in. But it's a pretty crappy position for the people doing the work. So it's one of those scenarios. It's quite weird. It's hard to figure out where that lies. I think in most cases, though, my main concern is more, it might be okay for art and things, but I don't like doing that for anything that's sustainable, because I find I think we've all seen a code base that's got like 10 different minds in it, and you can tell when people aren't on the same wavelength, and like people are making unilateral decisions which are actively competing with each other, and it's like a code base is really hard to sustain if it doesn't gel together. And so if you've got a bunch of people swapping in and out and doing different things, it's going to be hard to maintain. So maybe art might be fine, but again, I certainly wouldn't recommend an agency for anything other than a wholesale project. So like I've said before, I would hire an agency if I had a game and I wanted to port to another platform, because that is something where it's like, that is an entire project. I don't need to maintain it after it's done. I just need to pay them 50,000 and say, do it, make the thing happen. And then that's like problem solved for me,
That's good advice. I think for art, maybe a one-off would make sense then, but for a library of content, like if you're, especially if you don't have everything lined up, what you're going to need for maybe a large MMO or something, consistency is going to be important in style and direction. And, even in the Infinity PBR stuff, I like to work with the same people as long as possible, essentially until they get a full-time job because of their portfolio. Then they move on and have to find someone new. But consistency is important. And there are some characters in my library that, if you pay attention, they just aren't as good as the others. And that's going to be from an artist that either was brand new for me, or maybe they were a one-off that I worked with once or twice, but that's it. And the quality just isn't always exactly the same. And most of the time we can, if you don't look too closely, you won't notice, but there are going to be times where suddenly if you pay attention, especially if the game is super high fidelity, lots of close-up, you'll be like, wait, that one looks a little off from the rest.
Start to notice the character standing out.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of users who use the asset store for art, that's going to be one of the first complaints is that, hey, there's all these great publishers who make great art, but the art doesn't always match. So you kind of have to stick with one publisher who makes art if you really want that, or lower your quality standards and accept that at least for your prototype and your alpha and maybe even beta build, you're going to have characters from different artists that, yeah, they work good enough. We're good enough.
We're good enough. I mean, yeah, I got to say that art is definitely nice like that, where you can at least swap them in and put them in, and like you can get one-offs. Where, like Jason was saying with code, when you do that, it pretty much always turns into a disaster. You're like, hey, have this guy random dude do a one-off thing. I've seen so many people try to do it. My buddy just tried to do it again and had the same exact result. Tried to hire somebody to code off a Fiverr, and yeah, got a nightmare back out of it, and a waste of time and money. So I would recommend going with the art. There was a question that popped up about learning math in C#. I want to keep this one quick because I know it pops up a lot, but they're essentially saying that their friend recommended learning discrete math after they're comfortable with C# for game development. Would you agree this is an important area to study, or would you recommend any other math forms? I wanted to let Jason get this one. What are your thoughts?
So, to be honest, I'm terrible at math. I just am. And so the problem for me is, this is a bit of a personal story here, but I changed schools a lot as a kid. And so I used to be really good, top of my class at math. And then I changed schools twice over the course of 3 years. And because of that, I skipped over sections as we moved house and things changed. And I missed coordinate geometry. And anybody who's ever done game dev knows if you miss coordinate geometry, well, you miss like half of maths. Like almost everything stems from that idea in terms of, especially at the point I was learning it. So everything to do with slopes of lines and all that stuff effectively were things that were completely over my head. And I was trying to catch up, but it was so far behind that I ended up dropping out. Or not dropping out, but I dropped down a class level from being in the honors classes down to the ordinary classes. And then when I started doing game development stuff, I was dreading it. I was kind of worried, going, I'm terrible at maths. I can't do math. Can I do games? Is that even a possibility? But then you start doing games, and it's like, oh, this. It's not no longer feels like this abstract thing. It's like, I want to shoot that character. How do I shoot the character? Well, I need to rotate. That makes sense to me. What are the magical characters I have to write in which order to make that happen? And over time, you just start to intuit the kind of right answers. So I find that it's not, you do have to learn it. And I used to say, no, you don't need to, because it's not the big of a deal. But if I'm being completely bluntly honest, you will have to. The difference is, though, it won't be as hard as you think it will, because as time goes by, it'll start having a grounding in practicality. As for specifically discrete math, I would say that's a good one, but I would say that's probably coming from advice from someone who's good at discrete math, because the reason you'd learn that is specifically to cover things like graphs and probabilities and things that would be great for algorithmic use for things like procedurally generating content or creating drop rates and tables and stuff. And that's useful to know. Like, it would be really nice to have that information. Say with the geometric stuff, that's probably valuable as well. But the thing is, I find what happens is you're better off approaching it from the angle of, there's a problem I want to solve. I want a heat-seeking turret. I want bullets that will aim and like rockets that fly towards characters. And you'll pick up the math you need. Like, you'll have to learn how to point in a direction. You'll have to learn how to do Euler integration. You'll have to learn even the physics of how to apply that stuff. I wouldn't aim to learn math as a concept standalone and separately. You can, and if you want to go into that road, that's valuable. But I guess my piece of advice is, I've met many developers who are good at different things. There are people I know who dwarf me on mathematical programming to the point that I literally, if I need anything to do with complicated algorithms, I'll just bow out and go hire them. Because, you have to know where your strengths lie. Mine's architectural stuff. I know system design and system integration and system architecture. That's my area, but I'm terrible when it comes to the algorithmic optimization. I can do my own basic divide and conquer algorithms, and I can reason about how to use quaternions in most cases. But if I ever get to something where I'm like trying to simulate pitch, yaw, and roll with realistic forces on my own helicopter, I'm not doing that myself. Like, I'll do a bit of Googling, I'll get a basic thing in place, I'll give it to a friend, and I'll say, help. So I would say there's a lot of different people out there with different skill sets, and if you're interested in that, go for it. But otherwise, like, you're better off learning whatever hits for you as valuable, and then you can find resources online to either help with making or to buy assets to shore up your weaknesses. I think it's valuable to be a jack of all trades. That's kind of what I made my living on. But I would say I don't aim to be an expert in any one of them. I know enough to know when I'm hiring the right person. And so I'd say learn it enough to know what questions you're asking so you can ask informed questions of smarter people than yourself. But I wouldn't bother learning it with an intent of becoming an expert at it, because there's no point. You'll unless that's actually what you want to do, you'll just find people who will help you. Like, everyone's got their own interests. So that's my advice. I don't know if that's that's just
I
what
think
worked for
it's
me.
great.
But,
I think, yeah, your point of just like you're gonna learn the stuff that you need to know on the job, like when you get into the actual use case for it. So you've got to shoot a bullet, you need to figure out the drop rate or the dropping of that, or you need to figure out how to move something in a specific way or rotate around a thing. You'll see, and there's really going to be two options that you've got along the way. Is you'll either find like the solution and you can copy and paste it and not understand it at all, or you can find the solution and read through it, look at it, implement it, and then do a little bit of research. So like when you see it's using some math method that you don't understand or some formula that is a little bit confusing, usually it's going to be like math f dot something or vector 3 dot something, and you're not, I don't really know what this does. I would recommend go watch like maybe some Khan Academy videos on that topic. Like if you want to learn how to use a sine and a cosine or any other random thing, you do a dot product and you're not sure like what does this actually mean, go watch a Khan Academy video on it, or something that covers just the math, and then watch another, maybe a video, game development related, showing it, so that once you kind of have an idea of the math, you can understand the other part. And that's been, I'd say, the way that I've learned most of the math stuff that I actually end up doing. Because a lot of time you learn stuff and then you just forget it, right? You learn it and you never use it, you forget it. But if you learn like how to turn something or how to shoot a bullet, how to make something drop, it becomes a lot easier. But again, 99% of the time, not doing any complex math unless I'm working on the graphics stuff, and usually I get a graphics programmer doing that. It looks like you got something to pull up and show real quick,
yeah.
Jason.
So when most people talk about algorithms and maths in games, this is what they're thinking that people are talking about. Algorithms, 4th edition. And this stuff, this to me personally is intractable. I'm trying my best, but this is slightly beyond me. And I would say that I understand the concepts, but it doesn't really apply to the kind of stuff I'm doing. And so in contrast, you've got something like this, which is my recommendation. Nature of Code, Daniel Schiffman, or check out his YouTube channel, The Coding Train. Now, the online book is better than the written book because the online book has visible interactive demos. I just bought the book out of, well, I appreciated the stuff. I wanted to give him some money because you can do the online one for free. I recommend that because you learn the math in a fun environment where you learn how to make little AI characters, or how to generate fractal trees, or how to use like, a lot of people don't really understand what Perlin noise is. Well, what if you used Perlin noise and learned it to build an infinite like retro wave environment and stuff? Like, these are fun ways to engage with these topics. And even though I'm not very good at the subject myself, I find that gave me a solid grounding on that kind of stuff. So I would check out the Coding Train channel if you're looking to sort of try to get better at understanding these concepts.
Well, I just linked the book in the chat too. Looks good. I don't know if I've gone through that one. I don't think I have. I'm going to check it out.
It's my favorite math-ish book. That and Game AI by Example. They're my two sort of bordering on the too much math for me, but just about I can just about approach it level.
I've found when it comes to math, just as a final tip for me, being very verbose when I write my code comments on something that going through that process of making a character turn the right direction, the right amount, is surprisingly difficult because of maths. So I wrote down all my comments because sure enough, 6 months later, I'm going to come back to it and be like, I've forgotten everything I've learned. So the comments, make yourself lots of comments to remind your future self what you were thinking.
Yeah, I like to split out my formulas into very long variable names too, so that I know what everything is when I'm doing my stuff. Go ahead, Jason. You had more?
I was going to say also on that note, I do something similar when if there's a problem I'm solving. Like, how do I rotate this smoothly towards a target? there's like 50 ways you can do that. And so it's worth going on an adventure deep dive to learn the different ways. Like, should I use smooth damp? Should I use lerp? Should I use slurp? Should I write my own function for this? Do I divide, where do I put the time delta time relative to this algorithm? So I would say what I like to do is I like to make a little exploratory side project going, what if a random mover is another one? What if I want a target to randomly move around the scene? But I want to do stuff like, what if I want to anchor it close to a position? Or what if I want to randomly smoothly move it? Or what if I wanted to teleport and blink out of position? I would like make a side project that's that goal, and I would just go ham for a couple days, and I would build this really cool set of algorithms that do a bunch of stuff that are mostly just me Googling and copying and pasting and trying to figure things out. But when it's done, I can put a little box library and go, if I ever need to make something bounce around on screen again, I have like at one stage in my life, I have spent 2 days solving that one problem, and I have a nice collection of varying options for me. So I did the same thing with flying objects and things like, how do you move one object from A to B? Well, you can just apply to the vector position. You can apply to the velocity. You can write your own Euler integration. You can do your own, like, there's a million ways to do that too. And so I have like 15 or 20 different ways to move a thing from A to B that I've tried out. And that way, even if I don't remember the algorithms offhand, when the time comes, I can just go to my bucket of stuff and go, let's try a few and see what works. You know?
Just grab your already written code, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this question seems like a perfect one for Andrew, but I think it probably hits all of us. And it was about, do you think asset hoarding pays off later? I mean, buying cheap, great prices of assets in bundles, like from the Humble Bundle. I think there's even a Humble Bundle link down below for support diabetes if you want to go grab it. That's full of a bunch of assets. I would say yes, but I don't know if I'm crazy. I mean, I'm kind of an asset hoarder and I like going through things, but I also use the assets for all kinds of things. I mean, I'll come up with a random video idea and just off of an asset that I've got or something, or a game idea, or I'll just have fun with them too. So even the ones that like don't pay off financially, like I don't end up using them in a project, I still end up having fun with them, and it's like buying a video game for me. Like I go through and play with them. But what do you guys think about just the general idea of buying all the stuff that's on sale and cheap? And
yeah, I mean, so one of the things I've done is forgotten what I've purchased, and that I think is going to be a key part of this equation. That yes, it makes sense, but you have to remember what you got, because again, 6 months later, you're not going to remember that one sale or that one bundle, and I need a tool for this, but you already have a tool for that because you bought it and you didn't even realize you bought it. So going through my assets, or even keeping your own little spreadsheet about what you bought and why you want to use it, so that later you can come back and be like, oh, I was going to get that rain asset so I can get rainy stuff, wet stuff. I bought wet stuff and now I want to use it finally. So let me go grab it. Art, when it comes to especially music and sound effects, those are things that, people talk about music not being added till the end. It should be added early. Get music in your project, even if it's not going to be the final music, just like all art. Get something in there as a placeholder so you can get the mood down, understand how it's going to work, build your systems around it so that you can, code in how music works with your project. These are things that I think, for me, it's just having a very large library that you can just drag in right real quick without thinking about it is going to come in handy. But you do have to keep track of what you have so you know what to use it for. And also, I think for music, if you're doing anything like YouTube videos or other non-Unity projects, everything from the asset store can be used for any digital project. So all that music can be used on YouTube or other projects as well. So
I did not realize that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I assume you're on board with asset hoarding too, Jason. I don't think I need to ask.
Well, actually, I think this is very much one of those do what I say, not what I do moments, if I'm being honest. I do, in fact, asset hoard like everybody else. But I would say we're in a slightly different position than most people, and I think it's worth pointing this out, is we do content with assets, right? Like, if I buy an asset, I may not need it for a project or use it for something, but I can find a way to use it in a tutorial I'm giving with somebody as a fun reference point, or I might be unpacking it to learn how they made the asset as an interesting lesson for myself on what to do or not to do as a consumer of asset packs. Or there's a million ways assets are valuable to me that even if it's not practically used in a project, I can find value out of it. And also, it's a business expense. I can literally treat it as a business expense and have the VAT advantages that come with that. Um, if it's asset hoarding for the sake of asset hoarding, I would actually say it's a bad idea. I would say we might be a bad example for that because, again, for us it's valuable to do so. But if you're making your game, just buying it because it's on sale may not be the best option for you. Because what happens is most people, it's a false sense of productivity. If you're buying assets towards your project, you can often go, well, I've done some work on my project today. I bought this asset that I'll someday use that'll make it work, and I'll add it to my project. And I basically made my game today. And then, you kind of fall into this trap of self delusion. And I think, in truth, for most people, sales come and go often enough that unless you're actively making money with the assets you're getting, um, I would probably just wait, and I would solve problems with assets. I would instead wait till I have a problem, which is I want localization right now, like it's a thing I want to do, and then I might earmark an asset that might be on sale in the next few weeks that I would want to get, and then give it a week or two and see if it goes on sale. I wouldn't bother buying stuff in hypotheticals that it might value you in the future. Again, if you're a 30, 40, 50 something who's can afford it, and it doesn't really worry you too much to spend 20, 30, or 100 on some assets randomly, fine. But I would say it's not advice I would give people to do. I would say it's just a bad habit that I have as a direct result of, usually I end up in retrospect getting value from assets that other people may not have. So I would say probably not, realistically.
Well, and I think if people are thinking of it like it's an investment, it's definitely not, right? Like, don't buy it because like you're buying it to save money later, or you're gonna like make money off of it. Like, you're buying it because it's a good deal and there are things in there that you actually are interested in and want to use, not because like maybe one day you want to use it. And to be clear, like when it comes to buying the bundles and stuff, like I'll buy them, but there's got to be at least one thing in there that I want to open up and take a look at in the next couple of days, right? Like, oh, that looks cool. I'll get the bundle, support the whole thing because I want this one asset in it, and all the others are cool extra bonuses. But yeah, it makes sense though. You definitely don't buy them thinking that like, oh, I've got to get this because it's a great deal and I'm gonna somehow save money by buying things. People always think they're gonna save money by buying lots of things. Like, well, you're still spending money, but it's just you got to be conscious of the way you spend it. And again, I think of it for me a lot of the time, it's almost like an entertainment budget thing on some stuff. I'm like, I'm going to get this, have fun with it, learn a little bit, and enjoy it like I would buying a game. But then a lot of time I just end up reusing the things or put them on business cards for business expenses. Like I said, there was a quick question. I don't know if you had an answer to this one, Jason, about you had mentioned that Unity had released a video about camera clipping on the render pipeline. Oh, you've got a link for it right there. I'm just going to paste that link into chat and we'll move on to the next question. So there's the answer to that one. There's a video for it to show how to do the gun so it doesn't clip through the wall. What are your thoughts on the Mirror Unity networking asset? Do you recommend any similar assets? I'm going to take a look at Mirror pretty soon because I'm working on that RTS stuff, and I know you were working on Photon, Jason. Have you? So you still haven't dug into Mirror at all, right? You're just working 100% on Photon right now.
The project I'm on is currently Photon, so there's no need for me to really jump around. I'll have a better answer someday in the future, I imagine. But yeah, I've not done the comparison. But I would say, again, to taking my own advice, like I'm using what works for me right now. Like it's a different story if you're like if you're a larger scale into your project and you want to figure out what you're going to build the entire project on. But either way, just pick one of them. Just start making a thing. And if suddenly you start hitting confusing scenarios where after a couple of weeks, every couple of days, you're like, does this feature doesn't exist or I want this thing, then maybe compare it against the alternatives. But at the start, like I'll be honest, most games will either Mirror or Photon will do what you need. Like it's basically at the end of the day, just RPC commands and UDP packets. Like it's not at the very, very core of what it's doing. It's sending a bunch of data. The question is how much legwork have they done for you in advance? So like some of it, there is concerns for performance here or there, or whether you're paying for licenses or whatever. But I would say just pick one. Would be fine either way.
Yeah, and Mirror overall, I've heard all great things, and that's the one I've used Photon in the past. I'm gonna jump to Mirror for this RTS.
I've heard Mirror is the new hotness. Yeah, that's the one that I would probably end up moving towards in future. It's just this project was already Photon, so
yeah. And I've used, like I said, I've used Photon a bunch of times too, and it gets the job done. So I'm just gonna try this one out because it's something different. I'm gonna see if it's better or if there's a good reason. All right, let's see. Once my computer starts working again, pop this one up. James got his first game job, which a couple of years ago, and said thanks. So I just wanted to pop that up and say thanks for saying thanks because that was cool. Where can you hire professional programmers for contract work? This is much, much harder. The Unity for job forums, like I know Andrew mentioned this before, has actually been the place where I've had the most success. Like finding the best programmers literally was every time been the Unity job forums. Outside of that, I've used Upwork a little bit, okay results, and personal contacts is the other thing, or meetups that I go to and attend and talking to programmers there. And I've seen a lot of people hire other developers there that were just hanging out and chatting and talking to each other. But the Unity job forums by far is the easiest place and the one I would recommend as a starting point. I've met some amazing programmers on there. What do you think, Jason? Or Andrew, you've hired programmers too?
Actually, yeah, I'm curious what Andrew's thoughts are.
I have only hired a couple people who do coding similar things, and the jobs forum on the not the Asset Store, on the Unity forums is probably where I would go if I was going to do it again. I was actually thinking while you were talking, I was thinking, is there a site, like a job site dedicated to coders for game dev? And I'm sure there's sites dedicated for coders. But is there one dedicated for coders for game dev? And I was just thinking, man, maybe there should be. But I don't know beyond the forums where I would go. I actually don't know what I would do if I was looking for a serious job, a contract position, monthly contract for a coder.
From my perspective, I just lurk in communities. I'm in tons and tons of Discord groups. If you've got a maybe around 200 people or more ish Discord channel, and it's to do with Unity, and I'm probably in it, or if not, I've taken a look at some stage. I just keep an eye out. Like I don't really go with websites and things for that because I tend to not need that many contractors, and if I do, it tends to be specific ones for specific problems. And I would rather hire people that I can see is doing good work. I'm not really going to go through a whole big hiring process. I'm going to instead find people who are posting in showcase channels on various Discords or who are answering loads of questions, helping people out. And if I have a job that requires somebody, I will ping them directly and I'll say, hey, are you looking for work at the moment? And then that tends to be what happens. So I've said it before as advice that you should be very active in communities and be helpful because, well, that's literally what I do. I look for those people because they're going to be good employees. That's usually my go-to.
Yeah, and I usually ask friends too. So I'll ask friends for recommendations or referrals too. And I get a lot of that too, where people just ask me for referrals. Friends of mine will ask me if I know anybody who can do some type of project, and I'll try to give them a couple people that I know that might be open to it. So yeah, having friends, job forum, good stuff. And then here is a question on motivations. Just any tips on staying motivated in a project from start to finish? And I think we've talked about this a couple times, but the biggest one for me is always just having constant forward progress, just making a little bit of progress every day. It doesn't have to be a lot, but a little bit of progress every day or every regular period if you can't do it every day. And I mean, you've been working on a project for quite a while, Andrew. What do you think? Like, what do you do to stay motivated from like start to finish on your big long-term stuff?
So I actually have 2 points that are somewhat contradictory, I think, that are both valid. One, when, oftentimes, especially if, we talk about math and stuff like that, you get stuck on a problem that eats up way too much time. And it can be very demoralizing to be in that position where you're like, I can't move forward because of this one little thing. And in those situations, I find it helpful to take a step back and decide, do I need this one little thing? Is there a different way of doing this one little thing? Or can I just table it for now? Can I come back to it in a week or two? Can I work on another part of the project? that's the first point, which I think is helpful, just because sometimes you'll come up with the solution, your brain will just magically come up with it. Oftentimes you might realize, wait, I actually am thinking about this wrong. I don't need to solve this way, or I don't even need this whole thing. Maybe what I'm going down is a rabbit hole, it turns out. But there are going to be other times where you need to do something, and you do need to do that, and maybe it really is a blocker for you. And I talked earlier about the guy who screwed me with the art asset. I had hired him to make the hero characters for my game, the Barbarian. And that was the thing. I needed characters to run around the screen. Otherwise, I couldn't move on. And after going through this, I realized I had spent 2 months or more coding around the fact that I didn't have player characters, right? Because I was expecting that I was going to get these characters from this artist that never came through. And this is where I started, I had already started used the asset store, but the game is called the Barbarian because I realized, I swear, I wish I had saved a screenshot or a link. I swear someone on the forums had a very simple quote. I'm sure it wasn't their original quote, but work with what you have today, not what you hope to have in the future. And so I said, screw it. I went to the asset store. I found the Barbarian asset pack from Polygon Maker and bought that and named my game the Barbarian. That is how I got the name. And from that point on, I was able to move on. And so, that period was very demoralizing because I was spending so much time working on systems that I couldn't actually finish because I didn't have a character. I couldn't do so much that I was trying to do because I was missing this one part. So in that case, I think the advice would be don't table it. Find a solution that works now, that you're okay with now, knowing that you can come back later and make it better. And I think for, especially for me when I'm still learning a lot of coding stuff, a lot of times I know I'm not writing the best system I can, but I want to get it done. I want to move that ball forward. So I will finish the system knowing that I can come back later and optimize it.
Yeah, that makes sense with the placeholders in there and keeping that progress forward. Yeah, it's like the quote that Chris quoted and told me, I don't know who it came from originally, his whole make it work, make it right, and then make it fast. And then just making it work and getting your character in there, run around and continuing on that progress makes a big difference, I think. I'm sure you got some tips there, Jason.
Well, just on the motivation thing, so this is one of those ones that's it's a tough pill to swallow, but there's a great quote from John C. Maxwell. He did the Laws of Leadership book, and effectively he said that motivation gets you started, discipline keeps you going. And I think that's a particularly good way to look at it, because the truth is there is not a single thing you work on in your life where motivation will last from start to finish. You'll always have some moment where it's just an absolute pain in the ass, and you lose all interest, all that joy and fun goes out the window, and you'll start falling into the greenfield fallacy, which is halfway through a project, it's a mess, it's horrible, all these decisions I made, all of these sacrifices, it's not the project I wanted, but I'm wiser now, so if I start again, it'll be perfect, and I can then do it again the right way until halfway through that project you're back in the same boat. And so the truth is, you can't, if your aim is to be motivated the whole time, you'll fail. Like, you can't be motivated the whole time. You can't use that as your rubric for success. Instead, you have to realize you want something more than you want the motivation for that. So the trick is to let the motivation get you started and pump the energy into your project. But once the project is started, you need to find something else. You need to find your own discipline. And the best way to do that is to pick a goal in the distance that you want and remind yourself every day how close you're getting to it. And that's sort of the long-winded philosophy behind why I suggest using an agile style approach. Because if you do something where you're ticking small notes off on a regular basis, even if you might feel like crap one day, if you look at the giant board of the hundreds of little tickets you've ticked off, that's going to be a driving force for you. That reminds you that you have discipline to continue. But if you're relying on you being in the mood to, you'll never do it. So try to realize that your motivation will fail you. Don't let it guide your decision making, and aim for something higher than that. Aim for some form of discipline.
Yeah, I think it comes down a lot to just discipline, like building it into a habit, right? You take the thing that you like doing, that you love doing, turn it into a habit, and then when you start to see that you're checking all those things off, like you mentioned, it'll kind of like, it'll add in motivation. It'll kind of remotivate you and get you excited to go check off the next things. It's kind of like that building up the habit kind of adds the motivation over time. And I highly recommend that. And on top of that, if you're struggling with building up the habits, just doing things on a regular schedule, setting up a schedule for like, I'm going to code from these hours, like this hour to this hour, every X days or whatever days, helps a lot. Also doing things like, as somebody mentioned already in chat, live streaming your development. Just hop on Twitch, even if nobody's watching, hop on YouTube, even if nobody's watching at first, and just go through the process, talk it out, like talk to yourself and think it through. It'll help a lot, and it'll keep you kind of on a schedule, because you can start doing that just regularly, and you'll get used to it, and eventually people will start showing up, and it'll become like a thing where you have a habit and a reason and some accountability that helps kind of draw you into it too. So yeah, making a habit of things is by far the best. It's the only way that I've seen people be super successful. They got to be, on the same schedule, same habit all the time. I mean, it doesn't have to be a tight schedule, but a habit at least. So this one was a question about building a small team. How many people would you hire to build a small game, and what role would you have each of them play? So if you were trying to build a small game, for me, I would have a team of engineers with like maybe, so my ideal would be like 3 engineers, 3 artists, 2 game designers, and that's it. Like that would be the team, and maybe somebody doing management of it and the financial and all that other crap. But that'd be like my ideal like size of a small team, and where I'd have people working on things, and then the engineering would split up depending on the project, and same with design and art. But that's like my ideal team size of about 8 to 9 people or so. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you guys ever? It's kind of a very open-ended question, but if you were building a small game, I think like when I say small, I'm thinking like something that's like a year or two at least. If it was something really small, I'd probably go to like 2 people or 3 people, an artist, a programmer, and a designer, and call it good. What do you guys think?
You just need one in the asset store. Just kidding. I would just one. No, I would. If I were, money is an object when it comes to this stuff. But for a small game, if you're thinking like, an artist, a programmer, and yourself, if you're doing the work of the producer and, a lot of the design stuff, then 3 would be the bare minimum, I would think, because I would imagine the dev's not going to be doing the art and the art's not going to do the code. And it's, beyond that, I don't think you would need much more if it's a small enough project and everyone's focused.
Agreed, Jason.
I'm gonna just to go left field with this. I'm gonna tackle this from a different direction altogether. I'm gonna give you the enterprise answer to this, and then we'll dial the enterprise answer back down into something that's more palatable for a question of a small team. So this is a very interesting topic that's covered a lot in this book, the Mythical Man Month, and it's effectively the idea of how do you manage teams and people and deliver efficiently and fast. And the interesting thing is you start to ask yourself the question of, so the reason it's called the Mythical Man Month is because there's a general misunderstanding in project management and large scale companies that you can interchange a person for a month or equivalency, right? If I add more people, it'll make it a month faster, or some equivalent to that you can say, oh, 6 people, it's going to take me a year. Well, then 12 people will only take me 6 months, right? It's as if it's that straightforward. There's a million reasons why that's not true, and without even going into all of the details about why, it really comes down to there's onboarding costs and there's siloing of information and a million other reasons why that's going to lead to more trouble. And the common misconception that people forget is that adding a person to a team slows down development. It does not make it faster in the short term, with the hopes in the long term it'll make it faster. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, because when people are trying to answer this question, they often ask, well, maybe it's down to skill, maybe it's down to who the most talented people are, and there's the stuff online will tell you that the 10x programmer thing is a joke, or that it's like a meme. Well, the unfortunate truth is it's not really a meme. if you actually hire 2 people and you hire one really talented developer who's been doing it for years, and you hire 5 or 10 junior developers, that senior developer will probably actually work faster than 9 or 10 junior developers for no other reason than it's not down to the fact that they're some super fast typer. It's the fact that they know the systems well enough that they know what they can automate. And smart people who are doing it a long time, like to give you an example, I was working on a system where we were doing tabs, just like a collection of tabs where you had different pages. And before I was there, people were like making each new page by creating it and placing the prefabs and doing the stuff. I spent a day and I made a thing which would, you provided a list of pages and it would generate the tabs, hook all the buttons up, do all the stuff, and every page, every tab in perpetuity is done. So I took one day and I did the next 3 months worth of tab generation because that's how I approached the problem. And so the truth is, it in terms of how many people you need, it comes down to the truth is skill as well as the tasks you're assigning them. So if you have one person who knows what they're doing, you only need one person. If you don't, you need a lot more people to compensate. So at Enterprise, they're talking about the idea of how do you solve this problem, right? If you've got a giant company with thousands of people, how do you organize them? Well, there's this concept called surgical teams. And this is don't worry, I'm bringing it back. There's a reason why I'm going down this rabbit hole. Is even in a big company where you've got thousands of people, the advice is that if you have too many people, transferring information is nearly impossible because what's going to happen is people's agendas and goals are different. So even if you have 100 people and they're all trying to do the same thing, there's the classic phrase of too many cooks, right, in the kitchen, is that they will get in each other's way. They will rewrite each other's code. There'll be commit issues. There'll be a million reasons why that won't work. So what you need to do is take a large project, slice it up, silo it, and have each system built by a small surgical team. And then the surgical teams then work together with the manager to integrate. And that's why, despite the jokes around it, there is a hierarchy in corporations because you actually need this team of 3 people has their manager. This project manager manages these people. And you could say, what's a project manager even do? Well, the truth is, if there isn't a project manager there, you have one person managing 6 people, and it starts to get really messy and things get confusing. So the hierarchy is there, if only just to perpetuate the kind of structure of getting it to work. Now, all of that is to say, my point is, even in a big company, they recommend small teams. And so the answer is a small team, because no matter how big your company gets, you still want to be thinking in small teams because small teams can get things done providing they're all on the same page. So I usually would say 3 to 6 people, regardless of their skill set, is about the max you want on a team. And the question becomes, how do you divide up the work? Well, it comes down to what the most time is going to be. I find in projects often art is the most time consuming. There's the most amount of work to be done in physically creating and doing all of the art and the various different rigging and texturing and whatever. But they're things you can farm out to if you can find the right people. So having one lead art guy who figures out to find people and work that up and can find the people he trusts to hire and work together is fine. Same with a programmer. And so I would say in general, somebody managing testing, building, getting it to work, one person programming, one person doing art is probably good enough. um, Beyond that point, it would if you have the resources, it's probably a good idea to have somebody who's actually working on the non-technical aspects, because it's very, very easy to forget that your social media profile is part of your game development. Like, you need somebody doing the actual job of posting on Twitter. It may seem like a joke to say that, but literally it is a full-time job to be engaging with your audience, to be making constant tweets, to be doing social media platform stuff, to like there's so much there. So I would say, if you can afford to, even having your friend who's a non-gamer who wants to get involved but isn't very technical, say, research social how to make a post reach the top of Imager. There's an article on that. How to get the top of Reddit. Read these things, learn them, and start learning how to make the best possible GIFs to market your content. That's another job. So I would say keep it under 6, but also be aware of not just having 3 programmers and 2 artists. You want to have a broad skill set that hits all of the areas you need. QA is another big one. I would aim for one person to be testing. It can be the same person who's doing one of the other jobs, but just make sure that someone's job is to always be like beating the project to death and see what happens until it breaks. So.
No, that makes sense. I think when you get into bigger teams too, you're going to be it's broken up a lot. Like it gets, you see like these giant teams of like 100 or 300 people working on a project. they're very broken up and organized down into sub teams with sub teams underneath them. Art teams will have different subgroups doing just textures and models and environment and characters, and code teams that are doing client stuff, server stuff, backend stuff. Like as it grows and grows and grows, my 3, 3, and 2 is just like my ideal dream size for a team. If I'm making a team and I'm just making a game of my own, that's exactly the number of people, and I kind of already have most of the people in my head too that fit into those spots. So it's like an exact lineup there. But yeah, I think it's good advice, and it's just important to remember that there's a lot of subgroups in there, and it breaks up a lot. Like when you get into these big companies, like you're somewhere you might not even talk to an artist. You might never talk to an artist or not see an artist for months or years even. It's rare, but I mean, there are definitely scenarios like that. And I really briefly just wanted to mention on your 10x programmer about that being real. It is. I've seen people say that like it's not a real thing either. Without a fucking doubt, it's real. Like I've been the junior programmer at places and seen it. Like I've seen like me and 3 other guys sitting in an area getting a couple things done, knocking out 1 or 2 tickets a day and trying to figure out like building up these systems. And then guys like this guy Todd, he was senior guy, lead guy for a while on EverQuest and a bunch of other games. He would come in just like he'd be working on another project, come in one day like, oh yeah, I just knocked out 100 bugs real quick. It's like, yeah, I just went and did all these ones that nobody could figure out what they were because they were too confusing. It's like, yeah, they're no problem. Just knocked them all out before lunch and shit. Like, yeah, so the big difference, like night and day. But he's busy working on these other new things while we're supporting the existing games and adding new stuff to it. So it made sense, right? But there was a big difference there. And they would see that with a couple of the people there. They were just like, they'd been there long enough, they worked enough, and they knew the things. And their productivity was just like night and day difference. And when you meet them, like talk to them, like ask them questions, ask them for advice, and show them your stuff, because that's been some of the best stuff. Like showing them things and saying, "Hey, I'm trying to do this. I'm not sure this is the right way to do it. What do you think?" And they'll give you some crazy recommendation. You get lost and then learn a whole shitload. So, yeah. A real thing. I want to pop onto the super chat though that popped up. What Gang of 4 patterns have you personally found most useful in game development, and why?
I don't know how I want to answer this question, because I think I've ranted to you before about why I don't actually like this question that much. I guess the short good faith answer would be there's never been a scenario in a project I haven't used strategy and command, and then oftentimes factories come into play a lot depending on what I'm doing. But
so those are probably the most common ones that you'll find you actually use relatively regularly, right? I mean, if that's the question, is like what one, but I know you can tell them, don't just try to force it in. Go ahead.
yeah, exactly. Beat me to it. But I would say that like it's not. I don't like the mindset, and this comes from that being my mindset. Like I really did previously think in those terms, and I used to kind of hunt for design patterns as solutions to my problems. But I cannot stress enough. Like if you do that, you'll waste your own time, because you'll be reading these things with no grounding or understanding. It's like we talked about before with math. Anybody who's ever had problems with math in school and was like, this sucks, why am I learning this nonsense with points and dots and lines? It means nothing. And then you go into games and go, oh, it's so much easier now. Well, think of that, but design patterns. If you start learning design patterns, you're learning needless conceptual words and lines and UML diagrams that draw charts to stuff, because you never had that problem. You never actually had to solve the thing that it's describing. And so to you, it just looks like an arbitrary collection of stuff. Don't use those. Instead, start learning how to solve problems. And at some stage, you'll have a problem. You'll Google the problem, and somebody will say, use X pattern. And you'll be like, oh, then look into the pattern and apply it mentally to your current problem. And then it'll be, that's why it exists. And that's how you'll learn them. You'll learn them by directly applying them to your problems. So don't forget patterns exist until they organically come up in a research on a problem you're solving.
Yeah. So 2 things. One, the observer pattern. We left that one out. That is definitely, you use it all the time, so much that you don't even realize you're using it. Right? Use events and stuff. You're like, oh yeah, that's one of the patterns in there. The other thing is, if you're trying to get game jobs, make sure that you at least do a little bit of studying of the patterns and understand like some of the key ones and the names of them and get like a loose idea. You don't have to implement them. I wouldn't try to shove them into stuff, but I would do like a read through of the game programming patterns book or one of the game programming or programming patterns plural site library type thing. The nice thing about those is they'll just give you these pre-built scenarios. Say, here's the problem, here's the solution, and here's the way to use a pattern to make the solution better. And just kind of like like watching a class and learning a little bit about a thing with a specific scenario. Just don't try to go, okay, should I shove this into a thing? Just the nice thing about that is that it gets it into your head that like, oh, there is a pattern out there. If I run into recreating this scenario, I can think back and go rewatch that video or reread that chapter and see if it actually applies to my solution or not. So that's the one extra bit of advice, because they're just like get a loose idea of kind of like, that there are some patterns out there, some of the names of them, and you've seen them, like maybe you know what to go look for, just so you have a good idea of what to search for. Oh, and there's a shameless plug that there's a free. I'm just gonna click this one right here. Shameless plug. I have a free course on my YouTube channel about design patterns, so go check it out and go grab them and see that too.
You know what you've done now, though? I'm going to check it out, and I'm going to write comments if I have any criticism of the way you describe them. So just put that out there. You asked for this. Keep that in mind.
That's good stuff. So somebody asked if I give tips on making an RPG/RTS game from scratch. This was just at the bottom of the comment, so I had it up there, but I wanted to click on it and say that with the RTS one, that's something I've been doing the last couple of days, and I actually kind of just briefly want to talk about this with both of you guys. So with the RTS project that I started, and I started streaming it 2 days ago and kind of got the idea to start doing it 3 days ago from my wife. I'm using an asset pack as the starting point. There are a lot of ways that I could go about making an RTS. I could just start like building the world and the selection system and the unit movement and the armies and the combat and all that. But when I was thinking about it, I thought I want to see what's out there, see what I can use as a starting point, and just start building the game and see if it's fun first before I worry about like how good my selection system is or what the combat system looks like or like what that code is like. So I pulled in that RTS engine, and so far I would say I'm like 80% sold on it being a pretty good solution and handling most of my things. There are a couple things where I get a little bit lost. I'm like, oh, this is a little complicated, but I think I can see why it's like that, or why they've gone the route that they have to try to be relatively unopinionated and allow you to do quite a bit of stuff. There's probably some points where I want to make some changes and add in some hooks, but I thought it was a good starting point and pretty strong basis, and it has a mirror integration set up for it already, so I can just add in multiplayer networking. And it seemed like the perfect way to start it, because I just have the RTS there, have the core functionality, and build the parts that make it a unique game where it's not just a standard old RTS, and just kind of taking the pre-built standard parts and popping those in and then just replacing them as needed along the way. And it's generally like what I would recommend to people. So in the past, when people ask me like, how should I start making this game? I said, find a pack that does a good chunk of it, start there, and then build on it. And if you need to start replacing and swapping that stuff out, do it. But usually when I make my own projects, I don't do that. Right? I jump in and I'm like, oh, I got to start coding, because I just like, a lot of it is like I get an idea for a specific thing and I want to code that thing and I want to solve that problem. And then that's part of the game. But I just want to solve that problem. Like I want to figure out how to do this selection system or this formation system. And I'm just like intrigued on that and want to do that, and don't get into the actual game building part. So my plan now, using a pack, and that's kind of what I would recommend to start. I'm curious what you guys kind of think of that in general, though.
I'm a fan of that in general. I mean, because coming from my background where, I'm interested in coding things myself, but half of it is just because I want to learn more. And the other half is because, maybe I don't know what these other assets do and why I need them and how they work. But the idea of taking looking at RTS engine in specific, it, on the surface looks like it has all these things you need. And I'm cool with that, At the same time, though, I've run into issues where, you talk about the opinionated assets, and the structures where you can't change things so easily, especially if you don't understand how it's written. It makes it even more difficult to go in and figure out what you need to modify in order to make it work. Someone on my Discord recently was just talking about the differences between game creator and RPG builder, and how one was 10 times better than the other because of things, essentially just things that they found to be helpful in one versus the other. I don't think that means the one they didn't like is therefore not good, but it does take a different sort of process to start using one of these and understand these systems first in order to build the game you want. And then it's going to take, at some point, you're going to have to do a trade-off between the systems you want in your game and what you end up having, based on whether you can modify the systems you're using in order to get what you want, or add them yourself, and whether that's going to be even worth it. But I think it's a great way to start.
I assume you agree, Jason?
I do. In fact, actually, so I was watching a podcast with Tom Betts and Matt Shell on his channel Thousand and they brought up a very interesting point where they're talking about how when it comes to assets, sometimes what happens is you'll pick up an asset and you will start designing the features of your game around what the asset provides. You're like, oh, there's a heat-seeking bullet system in here, so I guess I'll use that because I'll add that to my game because it's part of this asset. Or oh, there's an area of effect attack or whatever, and you end up designing your game around what the feature set is, not what you originally planned. So I have no problem with using an asset to start, but I would say have a plan first so that you're not being influenced by the limited feature set of what you have, and be honest with yourself about whether or not the asset does what you need or it doesn't. And rather than like giving up your goals to fit the asset, if it doesn't work, then you have to be honest with yourself and either change it or add those features yourself. But I do 100% agree that it's a good way to start because for myself at least, I have a very bad habit of I just enjoy learning stuff. I just enjoy information, and I will happily consume as much as I can with no goal in mind of making anything. And I had to draw a very sharp line to myself and say, literally the way I approach learning things is completely different than the way I approach making things. Because if I go into making things with my learning things mentality, I'll mess around and learn a lot of stuff and I'll get nothing done, because that's not my goal when I'm learning things. It's to consume information as fast as possible. So if I'm trying to make things, I literally have to stop and completely discard all of my instincts and try a different approach. I do a very clinical, written out thing, part of getting things done, and a few other principles I've read, and I approach it clinically because, again, my goal is different. And so for me, at least, I'm very hyper aware that if I'm using assets and things, I would use them to solve problems. I would instinctively want to make it myself, but that's part of the fun learning brain, not the getting things done brain. So I actually heavily recommend using assets for no other reason than it forces you to keep your eye on the ball, right? You're focused on the actual agenda of, can I use X to make Y, not can I make X myself, which seems a bit pointless. So
yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I think so. On this, it also reminded me of something that I saw on it was a Reddit post. Every now and then I go through, like, a lot of time when I'm in bed, I just look at the GameDev subreddit and the Unity subreddit on my phone. And there was a post again by, it's weird, like 13-year-olds post a lot on Reddit, I guess. But this was by a 13-year-old learning to code and wondering if they should maybe not use a game engine and just use a library instead, so they can learn how to code the core stuff. And it just, like, it brought me back to when I was younger and I wanted to code games, and all I wanted was like a game engine where I could actually make a game, where I could get in and like tell a thing to move and do stuff and have that work. And it just wasn't a thing. Like back then, the first one that I could really get access to was Torque, which was a 3D engine that was very relatively simple back in the day and not easy to use, and I could do a little tiny bit of stuff with it. And that was pretty much it. Before that, I was using drawing stuff with buttons and drawing things in forms and other random graphic stuff using the MDI, the old school Windows interfaces, and then doing some OpenGL and what was it, Glide, the 3DFX. I don't know if you guys remember like the old school video cards, probably from when I guess you guys were like toddlers at the time, right? Like when they first made 3D cards and they had their own library for it before DirectX took over, like writing those things and having to like do all of the code to draw a triangle and all of the code to put a texture on there and then all the code to make a model, and like all of that stuff doesn't get you to a game. It just gets you to learning how to like recreate all of the stuff that's been recreated a million times.
If you want a perfect example, so Nick is in the chat pointed me towards a channel called The Cherno. And this is a guy who used to work on the Frostbite engine who from scratch is making his own game engine. This is a guy who has been working on game engines professionally for years and then decided to make his own game engine. He's been doing it 3 years, and his most recent video is he got a ball shooting.
Yeah.
So put that in perspective if you're asking yourself, oh, should I just start making my own effectively engine from scratch? No, don't be insane. Like if you're trying to make games, make games. I'm not saying don't learn how to make an engine. It's a fascinating and interesting thing to do. But like I said, you'll learn a good portion of it throughout I didn't need to learn how to make a rendering pipeline to understand how a rendering pipeline works, because you'll hit enough problems with like your shaders not rendering correctly that you'll have to know enough just to get them to damn work. You may not be able to program them from scratch, but you'll learn how the pipeline works because you'll need to debug your issues. And so by the time you're comfortable enough and you've made enough projects, when it's like, oh, maybe I should learn the rest of this, then it's easy to do, and then it's fun because you're sort of shoring up knowledge you kind of half understand. I wouldn't say start with learning to build a game engine. I would say start with using one, understand why it's there, and then ask yourself afterwards, can I learn how did I get to this point from the other stuff? And that's fascinating. I think it's an interesting way to go, but just start by making games. That's just a much safer way to go.
I tend to agree. Or just learning how to code common stuff. So a lot of the time people want to learn how to code like the most advanced, most complicated stuff, the lower level things that have been mostly abstracted away and solved. And there is some value in learning that stuff and knowing that stuff, but there's a lot more value in knowing the stuff that you actually use day to day. Like the level of value that you're going to get a lot more immediate payoff learning the stuff that you actually use to build a game or build a project or build a website or whatever it is that you actually want to build, instead of learning how to build the tools to build the thing, right? It's like learning how to build a computer before you learn to code, because I got to be able to, install all of the components first. Just buy one or or know it and have it. It's totally unrelated, I guess. So, okay, let's jump into a couple more questions. I think there were a bunch of them that popped in, but I was too engaged to really pay attention to them. And so there were a couple of people asking about comp science degrees and game dev stuff and whether or not that was required. And I know we've talked about this a lot. In general, though, it seems to vary dramatically where you are. Like where I am, it doesn't matter at all. Where Jason is, it matters a reasonable amount. I would ask people in your local area whether or not it makes a big difference having a degree for getting into a game programming job. I know that I had a degree in electronics, is totally unrelated, totally useless, had no impact, and I've never had my degree have any impact at all on any job that I've ever applied for. Nobody cared. I don't think I've listed it on there since like the first time I applied for a job, because this is totally useless, and it just like kind of distracts. Like, oh, look, I can do some circuits and stuff, like totally unrelated, and I think that it probably doesn't help at all or hurt more. So it varies a lot though from where you are. Go ahead, Jason.
I've said it before, but I'll summarize it briefly because I don't want to repeat the same thing. I've said this in multiple different videos, but I would say my degree in game development got me a job in a bank. My Reddit account got me a job in Unity. And that's best I can say, is my engagement with the community is what got me the job I have now. But that being said, my college degree made me a good enough programmer to get that job. So I would say catch-22, my recommendation is probably always going to be, I actually think you should get a degree in computer science, but you should do it not with an eye to be a game developer you'll never get a job in most cases in a game studio directly out of a course in game development. What you will though is you'll get a academic understanding of code that you will simply not get if you go through the normal Unity route. Whether or not that's valuable to you is a different story, but I think it is just to have that grounding that you can have any tech job you want, then you can migrate into games. So I would say go for the degree, but don't treat it like it's not going to be your entryway into game development. It'll be the skill set. It'll be the starter kit that gets you on your journey to be good enough to start the adventure of trying to become a game dev, would be my personal suggestion.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. Then here there was a post about the majority of entry level game dev jobs requiring a CS degree or having a CS degree as a requirement. And in that case, to be honest, I would ignore that. Like if it requires a CS degree in the job requirement and it's just a normal game job and it's not at like some giant corporation that's got these hard rules for everybody in every position, which is rare but does happen. Most of the time, that's just a placeholder. It's that they want that, or they want some other proof that you know how to code. It's kind of like an alternative. I've never once seen anybody like denied because they didn't have one, at least in a game dev job where I've been working, because of a degree. And I've very rarely seen people get any preference because of it. And it's usually they get a little bit of preference from one or two people in the company who really love their college. Like it's the same two people who like talk about their college all the time and wear their college hoodies to school and stuff. But most of the time people judge it a lot more based on your actual skill, like how good you are at coding and how good you do at the interview. Because getting a degree, like it's really, really hard to judge what you've learned on a degree with code. Just because I mean, I've met people who've like learned insane stuff and are fucking amazing and know all kinds of crazy shit I couldn't understand. And I've met people who got master's degree and couldn't point out where the processor was in the computer. So like it's a big variety there. So it makes it hard to add value over the. Go ahead.
Brass tacks with when you see a job interview and it has, you know, degree on the job posting, to be honest, here's the secret truth between that, as someone who's written those, that doesn't actually mean they care about the degree. What that means is that's a scare tactic for people who have no experience, because people don't realize this. You will get transfers who have no experience whatsoever, who've been teaching themselves programming for 2 months, who will apply to your job that you've requested, basically a 4-year veteran experienced person in what they're doing. And sometimes if you put in needs college degree, you'll scare off those people, which is kind of what you want to do, because you're going to get enough candidates anyway. You don't want the people who think that's a barrier that's too high to cross. But people who are already confident enough in their abilities will kind of know it's not really about the degree, it's more about the ability. I am good enough that I'm at least at that level. And that's kind of the way it works. So if you're confident enough in what you're doing, chance your arm and still apply, even if you see that. But keep in mind, the whole point of that is to basically say, we can't afford to teach you. And there's a difference. If a job says graduate, what the subtext is, we don't care what your experience is, we'll teach you on the job. If the job says requires X experience or degree, it's like, we don't have time to teach you. We want you to get the ground running. That's most of the resume stuff you can forget about. Those are the two secret phrases you're looking for in most job offers.
Yeah, I generally expect if a job requires no experience and just a degree, they're expecting to teach you because you're not going to know shit, right? Like you're going to come out, like you're going to know the fundamentals, but you're not going to know how to do the actual job. But if it requires actual working experience, then they're expecting you to be somewhat running from the ground or from start. Like I've never seen CS students come straight out of college and be super productive. I mean, I've seen him be somewhat productive, but not like super, super productive. That said, I have had, I've got a good friend, Paul, who's got some developers he hired off of a boot camp, and he's had amazing success off of it. So he said, like they went through boot camp, they're really motivated developers, who, and this is not game dev stuff. This was more web stuff, but he's had a really, really, really good experience with it and seems to like it and highly recommends it. So if anybody's interested, I'll get the info on the place that he was hiring from. But he's had just great results with new developers, and it's kind of like their first job, but they're super productive and fast and good to work with, which is kind of a surprise. I said most of the time when I've seen new developers come out, they come out a bit confused because the work environment is nothing like the school environment where they had like, here's what we're doing today, these are the things, this is your task, the work environment is more like, here are all the problems. We got to figure out who's doing what and how we're going to fix it. And, we'll get you some stuff too eventually.
And it's not always about kind of experience thing either. So one thing that I kind of thought about is that when I was starting in the company, I thought, oh, I'm going to be an idiot here. I'm going to be the guy who doesn't know anything. And I'm going to feel embarrassed about that. But then when the jobs happened, I actually found myself having the opposite. I had a lot of hubris because I was sitting here going, these guys, 20 years experience more than me, they're doing it the wrong way. They're not all the clever stuff I was taught in college. They're not using it. They're not doing it the right way. And so, if anything, you have to be careful of both sides of it. Is that you'll actually end up having a lot of more up to date, well, maybe not up to date's the right word, but more academically accurate knowledge coming out of college than the practical hands on stuff that people will be doing. So you might look at that and mistakenly see it as they're doing it the wrong way, but there's fundamentally a different way to approach problem solving to actually solve problems versus the sterile academic answers. And so it's worth kind of backpocketing that sort of that surprise that it's dirtier code than you thought or not as well organized as the lessons taught you, and pay attention and notice maybe why that might be the case. Because I was very egotistical coming out of college because I was good at it in college, and I came into this environment and I'm looking at all these people doing it the wrong way, and I felt like I could teach them a thing or two when I really should have just been paying attention instead. So yeah, that's something else to watch out for.
Yeah, I think at the extreme of that, you get them like guys coming in and they see code and they just start optimizing it. You're like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm optimizing this, make it faster. This is a bad loop. And like, that runs once at the start of the project. It takes 10 milliseconds. You're wasting your time and you just broke everything. Like, oh, yeah, like it's very easy. It's a lot of that. Like, I've got a solution and in search of a problem, just like we said with the design patterns, get the same kind of thing.
And the opposite's true as well. I've gone into projects where I'm like, oh, this is badly coded. Let me like put some architectural layers and make it better. And I've suddenly like tanked the performance of an algorithm because I didn't realize that it was in a hot path. And here's me like trying to make it cleaner code when all I've done is completely ruin the performance of something. So it's like,
yep.
yeah.
I think we're probably all run into that. If you don't run into that at your job, then there's probably an issue. It means you never hit that part on the curve there. Getting thinking you're too good. It's usually probably for me. I'd say it was around like the 3-year mark or so, and I thought I knew everything and didn't know a damn thing. Super chat popped up. I just wanted to hit it and say thank you real quick. It says felt like an XP boost to started watching, and plus Charles's channel. We got to hit Charles up again soon. And sad that Bracky's is gone, but yeah, I miss Bracky's stuff too. It was always fun just having it queued up for Sundays and having something new and entertaining to watch and find out about something new.
It is funny how Bracky stuff is still evergreen as well, right? Like I find myself from time to time doing a search for something quick, and a Bracky's video still pops up. It's like it's still the go-to for a lot of those like quick. How do you do X, Y, or Z? You know?
Yeah, they're really well done, and I think they always did a great job on those things, making them easy to consume and easy to kind of learn a lot from them. So, let's see, were there other questions in here? What's your checklist of actions before promoting a game? Pop it up on Steam. Set up. You should do all of that stuff early on. I think we've talked about this before, but in general, like start promoting your game. Like when you start working on it, start talking about it and building it up. And as you start deciding that you're going to keep building it more and more, promote it more and keep pushing that. Don't wait until the last second. Just start right away.
Yeah, and I'm trying to be careful not to cannibalize the content here too, because I 100% mean this is that I've taken all of the courses. I've taken Jason's courses, I've taken Thomas Brush's, I've taken David Whaley's, every course that there is I take because I like to know what's out there, and people ask me whether courses are worth taking, so I like to give them a good answer. And I can honestly say that question is best answered in what Thomas Brush covers in the combined course with Jason. Is like I had heard a lot of that stuff before from people I know who've made games and released them on Steam and told me the numbers, but there's stuff I still didn't know, specifically about Nintendo and publishing to consoles that he talked about in those videos. But he's got an actual checklist, like a literal checklist you can get as part of that course that will tell you, do these things, these launch dates, check these dates, do this stuff, make sure you hit these markers, these places on Steam are where you get your most engagement numbers from. Here's how you set this up in advance. So I would say if you actually are launching a game, a few hundred is trivial in the benefits of what it'll get you in terms of building your community in advance. So if you're just curious, that might be out of your budget for you. But if you actually have a game and you're asking in earnest, how do I market my game prior to launch? I would say pick up the course.
Yeah, I like Thomas is super organized on that stuff. So he had quite a few checklists from what I remember. I got his course right when it came out. I was like, oh shit, I'm going to learn some marketing stuff finally, because it's like by far my biggest weakness. Like, I hate marketing things. I hate trying to sell stuff and like trying to promote a game and stuff. So I grabbed it and I got quite a bit out of it too. I also really liked the I learned quite a bit about art in there, and just learning about art and colors and stuff. Because I'm still and not that I'm good at it, but I had fun with it. Yeah, but promoting's hard. It's just like you said. It's also like a full-time job for a lot of people. If people just go in and have to be a promoter, or like the person that's going out there publishing stuff on Twitter and all that stuff every day. And sometimes it works good if like it's actually a person at the company who does another job and is just good at that too. But I don't know. I'm not good at it. So I wanted to jump on to this next question. What would you require from a mid-level Unity developer? What's the biggest difference between junior and mid-level? And for me, they're really, I guess, like if we're going like at 3 tiers where there's like a junior, a mid, and a senior, I would put the junior at like they come in, I can give them tasks, explain the task, and they'll probably be able to do it. Ideally, though, at first I want to start like coding with them, working alongside them, and getting them used to it and seeing what they're doing and teaching them as well. I expect a junior level developer to be learning a lot on the job and kind of reading a lot of other code and not be extremely productive, but work on less than vital systems where I don't have to worry about them breaking too much, and they can work on things that are somewhat already isolated. Ideally, mid-level, I want to be able to say like, here's the problem that we have, this is the system that has the problem, can you find the problem, fix it, and let us know what the solution was, so you can verify that it's not an issue, like the solution's not going to break something else. So here, give us the solution, we'll do a code review and go over and do that kind of thing. Or we've got this new idea, this new system that we want to put in, come up with a design for it, and then work with the senior level and start building that system out, start putting it together. And then at the senior level, I expect them to be able to just go like, hey, here's the project, we're going to start it, create the new project, get it going, start building the systems, build the systems without any real oversight or supervision needed. Or with the mid-level, I would expect some supervision to be there. And that's kind of, I guess, like my break on the 3. Where do you put them?
I guess I usually don't have a lot of luck in this area because I don't like to admit it, but my standards are quite high. And so what I tend to end up having, my dream goal when I hire anybody is I just want to be able to assign a job and know I can leave and be happy with whatever result comes out. And I'm not too fickle about the details. People will think I'll judge them on specific code practices and stuff. I don't care as long as it works. Ideally, if it works and you've tested it, that's brilliant. That it means it's refactorable. I don't care too much. It's only if there's like glaring mistakes that it's an issue. My problem is more people who can't solve problems themselves. And that's been my biggest issue, where I assign a task and I end up having to get involved at some stage later because, a couple of weeks later or a week, it's like, oh, I'm having trouble with this. Can you help? Now, I don't mind helping. That's something I do a lot. I literally do it in my free time. But if you're hiring somebody, the whole point of hiring someone is to take it off your plate. And if it's not being taken off your plate, then that defeats the point. And I find that's often a reason why I don't hire that many people, because I don't know if I can just trust them to just take a task and run with it. So from a mid-level developer or higher, I honestly want to be able to give you a task, and if you have questions, Google it, figure it out. Like I'm paying for my free time back is what I'm paying for. And oftentimes it like junior developer, I expect honestly nothing from you other than enthusiasm, because I expect to be teaching you on the go. But by the time I'm hiring a mid-level developer, it is entirely, I just want the problem solved. Because if I, otherwise I'd just do it myself, right? Like that's kind of the point. So I find that's my biggest issue is you get people who are trying to help so much that they keep double checking that it's right. Is this okay? Should I do it this way? Is whatever. It's like all you're doing is wasting my time. Like do something. Give me a version I will give you very detailed notes, and you go off and make new ones. And this is something that you learn as a contractor. People don't hire you because they're hiring you to solve a problem for them. Like, and I've used the plumber example before. If you've got a plumbing problem in your house, you're like, hire plumber, magic happens, plumbing problem fixed. You don't want them stopping every 10 minutes going, should I use this one or this one? Okay, what about this pipe or this pipe? Like, I don't
What color
pick the
pipes do you
one.
want here?
Yeah, just pick the one that works, please. Like, I'm not too
What
busy. And
connector
so,
should I put in here?
yeah, and I ended up finding that, and this isn't even a bad, this isn't meant in a bad way, but it's coming from a positive place, but it tends to be a problem. Is if I hire somebody and they keep doing this, to me it says two things: they're either not confident in their own decision making, or they're overly eager to please, and that means they're not going to. It means that its problem is that they're going to take up most of my time. So what I want is self confidence in what you're doing, and I don't know how to tell you to get that. But if I'm looking for somebody, I want somebody who looks like they're going to run with a task. That's all I'm really looking for. Do they look like they don't need handholding? That's kind of all I look for.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's kind of like when you get to that mid level or the senior, definitely, but at the mid. And one thing to note too is that sometimes companies really want mid level developers and they just put the post as a junior level with 3 years of experience because they want to pay less, right? Or they don't know what they're doing when they're making the post. So look at the years of experience is usually a good indicator of what people actually want and what they're looking for. There was a question about the future of games. Like, what do you guys think about the future of games with client server communications? Will services like Stadia make it easier to develop? And I thought it was interesting. I thought Stadia got killed already. I thought they'd knocked that out.
I'm pretty sure that's X. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Google service, so like most Google services, it's got a
Join the Google
1% chance of being like a big giant thing that takes over the world, or 99% chance of dying. Right? Like, they've killed more things than most companies have started. So I'm not too surprised. I think that it's just going to get easier and easier to do client server stuff as networking communications get faster and people keep building frameworks. It'll keep getting easier. But I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know what the next one will be or the next thing that'll make it the easiest is.
What about your goals, Andrew, for your project? Is that going to be a big multiplayer giant thing down the line?
Nope. I think, originally I wanted the Barbarian, that game, to be 2-3 player where you could join in with somebody. And at the time, I was brand spanking new, so networking was more than I could chew, and I didn't know it, of course. So I had played with some and got some small networking projects going where things would move on the screen and following tutorials. But then Unity stopped or canceled their existing networking. And I think it was the Unite in Boston, I was in a talk where like, yep, but we've got a new one coming out. And I think that new one still hasn't come out. So
yep. That was at Unite LA in like 2016. They announced that.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to go with the philosophy of work with what you have now, not what you hope to have. And I'm going to include in that my own knowledge and skills, and exclude any thought of networking in my upcoming projects.
That makes sense. I think people just go to it as a default, thinking it's going to like add value to the game, but unless the game is really meant to be multiplayer networked, it doesn't do much. It just makes it a lot more complicated. It's going to be the interesting part on this RTS.
I'm also the bad audience for this because I just don't actually like multiplayer games. I know it's a sin to say, but other than the one multiplayer game I ever really played was Overwatch, and I don't know why. I can't even explain how before this I never played any game that wasn't a single player game for longer than 60 hours ish. There's a bit of Halo in college and a bit of Gears of War with friends, but as a general rule, I like narrative driven story based games. Overwatch is an anomaly. I just like thousands of hours spent into that. I don't know why. It just resonated with me with the cleverness of the character design. But anyway, I guess for me, I find most networking stuff to be it takes you out of it, right? Because the whole point for me of gaming is escapism. It's like you immerse yourself in an experience or world, and oftentimes if you're playing a game with multiplayer mechanics, oftentimes there are things like even just that login screen. There's nothing irks me more than when you start a game and it opens up with advertisements for itself, as in buying extra things before you even pressed play. So
even DLCs.
Like games like Quake and all that stuff always just drives me insane. Like if I like the game, I will go to find other DLCs for it. If the front page of your game, your start screen advertises to me, that's going to put me off immediately. And then when it comes to multiplayer, like a great example, I love the Borderlands first one. Amazing game. I played the crap out of that. Played it single player, and then I played a bit with a friend of mine locally. But then I played 3, I think, or was it 2 or 3? Either way, I played one of them with a group of friends. Now we had a lot of fun, but we were just talking over the game the whole time. Like we didn't hear half the dialogue. We didn't have time to read stuff. And I'm not saying that it was a bad experience. I did have fun, but that was like we had fun despite the game, not because of the game, right? We had fun with our own in jokes. We just happened to be vaguely shooting roughly in the right direction, and then someone would hit some invisible marker and we'd run to the next milestone. So I think there is a place for multiplayer games and experiences. I just think that oftentimes they're diametrically opposed. Like if you're playing a game that is Among Us, that is the game. The social experience is the game. The mechanics are there to fulfill that. If you're playing a game like Borderlands, why put so much effort into energy into writing and animations and fun stories if you then expect players to run around and shout over it and have fun with each other? Right? Like I just don't. I think multiplayer as a concept should be not only taken carefully from an effort perspective, but you have to ask yourself: is it actually going to contribute to the tight game loop that you're trying to create for your game? So personally, I find most games at a like core narrative level are more fun single player. And I enjoyed the discussion afterwards. I love talking about games with people afterwards, but I don't think games need constant multiplayer in them all of the time as an ongoing thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think just slapping it on, especially, is terrible. If you're going to build a multiplayer game, it should probably be designed for that multiplayer experience, where that's kind of the goal. And I think that it works a lot better if it's that way, and then the single player is kind of just an afterthought type thing. If you're going to build a multiplayer game, and not try to build both as a core thing, that gets very difficult and messy, and I'd say generally just doesn't work out very well. There was a question here about learning C++ versus C# and Unity. So they want to go for a smaller studio or a larger studio, but it seems like a lot of the developers want C++. Now, the ones that want C++ are going to be pretty specific. It's going to be AAA companies using Unreal, because Unreal is using C++. You should definitely, if you want to work on an Unreal game, you need to know C++. Well, if you're the programmer, at least, not if you're the artist. But it's going to be those, and it's going to be all of the companies that have their own custom engine. So that's a lot. There are a lot of game companies out there that have built their own engines, especially the bigger, more established ones that have been around for 20, 30 years. They've all got their own engines that have been worked on and iterated, and new versions of them, and they're all written in C++ too. And in those cases, some of them are going to want people that can extend and build on those engines, but a lot of the time they just need you to be able to work in and understand their code and their engine and stuff. So it depends a lot on the company that you're going to. I would say there are still probably more that that do C# and Unity stuff nowadays than there are with C++, but the bigger the company is, the more likely it is to be C++ that they're using, or at least
and also,
I don't know how true that is now, but that was always the case before, so I assume it's still the case.
It's also worth noting that while game engines are still predominantly built in C++, oftentimes they put a layer of a scripting language on top of it. So they will, like, even in engines that are written in C++, you will often be programming in C# because it's a more approachable language to script in, and oftentimes the marshalling of data back and forth isn't costly enough to kind of mitigate the benefits you'll get from having an easier to approach design language on top of that, without having to manage all the garbage and stuff yourself. So yeah, it depends. It 100% depends on what you're trying to get into. But I'd say for the most people are not trying to get a job in a AAA studio. And if you are, that's a different path with a different kind of adventure. I think in most cases, just open Unity, put some cubes down, write some shooty scripts. Start there.
Yeah, just start by writing the code. Once you can do the logic, it's not too difficult to switch engines and languages. I mean, it's not like it's instant. Like, I know some people can get the delusion that, like, if you can work in one engine, you can switch over to the next one in a week and be productive. Definitely not the case, but you can definitely get ramped up much, much quicker. Maybe a third or a quarter of the amount of time that it took you to learn the first one. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but if you're interested in a specific place, definitely learn the stuff that they are using. Like if you want to work at the place and apply there, it's going to make, if I'm hiring a Unity developer and they've got Unreal experience and there's other ones with Unity experience, I'm going to take the Unity experience. Same with Unreal. If I'm hiring an Unreal developer and I've got a bunch of people coming at me with Unity experience and a couple with Unreal, I'm going to go with the Unreal experience. They're going to go with the people that know the thing that you're working on. So make sure that you're learning the exact things that they're working on if there's a specific place that you want to work at. That's always been like kind of my recommendation. Get used to their middleware, their tools that they're using, find out all of them. You don't have to spend your entire life dedicated to learning them, but spend some time learning those things and understanding them so that when you apply there, you have some experience with it and you can talk about those things. So hopefully that's helpful. Let's see. We've got a couple more questions here. Does it help to make a game manager in a game that you're making? I've seen a fair amount of people programming a game manager for their game. What do you think about this? You guys both use some sort of a game manager regularly, or do you kind of let it come together on its own, or what do you do? What's that?
Well, yeah, I think you made a good point. Like, I think you secretly bake the answer into your question. You say, do you make a game manager or do you let it come together on its own? Which implies the same thing, which is you end up with a game manager. And that's what I was kind of going to get to, is it doesn't matter. You will always end up with a game manager. The question becomes, do you try to sit there and write it first, or do you let it happen by the default of eventually systems collide? So yes, the answer is you'll always have one from my perspective. I just don't recommend trying to sit down and write one. I think you will eventually end up with one if you keep working at it.
Yeah, it ends up being like the place where everything is getting tied together. Where you're like, where does this go? Like, okay, that's kind of like your main entry point in an old C++ application, right? It's like the main thing that's controlling and setting up that loop or whatever stuff is in there. And you're not going to need it at first because stuff's just simple. Like until your game gets complicated and you have state that you're changing in between and things that need to react to it and stuff. Oh, let's see. Any other interesting question? Oh, there was one other one about solid stuff that I wanted to pop up. So I don't think I've ever seen an interface used in tutorials. Do you think the lack of solid practice in tutorials is an issue that needs to be addressed to spread awareness of it? And I wanted to pop this up because I think that there's a really good reason that you don't see a lot of interfaces used in tutorials. And it's mostly just because they're targeting the lowest common denominator, right? A lot of the time, like I know even when I do it, when I make a tutorial, if it's about a specific thing, and try to minimize the number of other things that I'm using in the tutorial. So if it's about movement systems, I'm going to try to do it without adding interfaces and abstract classes and just keep it as simple as possible and on that topic. And I think that that's a lot of what you see, because you'll see interfaces used constantly in an actual project. You open up like a real game project, you're going to see them pretty regularly, but in tutorials, yeah, it's just I think it's largely just because you don't want to overcomplicate and confuse things or confuse concepts and show something that's a tertiary concept to the primary thing that you're working on.
Yeah, I guess the example for me is, have you seen those little kits that are there to teach kids how to build things like little planes or how to build bridges and things? So we've all probably had some class or some example where we've had to build a bridge or some stable standing thing, and you'll stick together a lot of things and try to get it to work. Well, whoever's doing that is not going to come along and say, you haven't accounted for the shear force and knock it down or something. Right? There's not you're not going to get in trouble for not having these individual ridiculous, if you look into what it takes to build a bridge, you would be disgusted and amazed with how complicated it is, that literally you can build a bridge out of the best materials in the world, but depending on how it vibrates, depending on the frequency of whether it's the number of people walking across it or where it is in the world or all the different things, that bridge could just shatter. And there's some really great examples online of how, even with the best knowledge on how to build bridges, you can still screw up if you don't know where you're placing it in certain different things. My point is, something that seems like bridge building, you don't start there, right? If you're teaching someone how to build a bridge, you start with, it needs to be a self-standing surface. You need to build how to apply forces and whatever. And so from our perspective, we could teach tutorials that have interfaces in them, but that's like applying for how do you deal with boundary kind of separation in a large scale application. You don't have that problem yet. So there's no point in us explaining the tools to solve problems you don't have. And so instead, most of that stuff tends to be relegated to external stuff. For example, if you are learning how to write code, you'll go to Khan Academy and you'll learn what code is. If you're trying to learn how to build enterprise code, you'll go to Pluralsight and they'll skip all of that stuff and they'll jump you straight to application architecture, because that's who you are going to Pluralsight. There's like specific courses there to teach you how to, how to scale to certain different things. So I'm a big fan of a lot of that architectural solid principles stuff, but it's the luxury of advanced tool sets for people who already know what they're doing. That's like learning your power tools. You don't teach someone carpentry by starting with power tools. You teach them the concepts and then you move to them once you're good enough to do so. And I think a lot of people, that's just too confusing to start with. And honestly, I have a different opinion than other people here. Some people say a year or two. I say 4. I say it takes you 4 years of pretty competent development before I would be comfortable letting people be familiar with a lot of the design patterny complicated stuff. Solid principles earlier, because that's just being a good citizen. But like my standards I've seen people abuse and mess up that stuff so much that I would want someone to have 3 to 4 years experience before I start going down the why interfaces are important thing. Just way further than everyone else. I'm aware of that, but that's just my stance on it.
Yeah, I have to resist the urge to teach my 13-year-old how to abstract his code. I'm like, no, look at it. I'm like, that's cool. That works. That's awesome. I'm like, I think, oh man, I wonder if we can make some classes out of this and restructure this. Like, oh, keep it simple, keep it simple. But yeah, it's I don't know. I liked your mention real quick though about solid principles being at least get that one, and I think that's an important thing. Like, don't push that.
I think clean code. I'm not gonna keep reaching for bucks. I have to clear my desk and then put them back afterwards. Clean code, especially, every developer in their first year of coding should get that book. Bob Martin, Clean Code, get that book. That's not the airy fairy high in the sky philosophical stuff that a lot of other books are. That's just write code people enjoy using. That's the kind of core presupposition. The core presupposition. Kind of like my words. Yeah, whatever. This is the core thing in that book. Presupposition is in that book. Is I would recommend that one as a recommendation just to get yourself writing code that you yourself and get you thinking about your code. I think that's my biggest recommendation. Is people write code without thinking about the code itself. It's kind of like the difference between writing a story and learning about the language itself, right? Like actually learning what words mean and how they apply. And so I find there's a value in understanding your tools. So clean code makes you think about what the effect of the decision making you have is. If you don't do that, you'll start writing code as if I need this, do this, and you'll start writing code, and it works perfectly fine. But you will have side effects where you come back to it and dislike your own code. But if you stop and learn to think about your code and think about the consequences of your decisions and what if I come back to this later and does this make sense and linguistically am I getting my intent across, and if I want to change this later, is this the right name for things? Just having that grounding of reasoning about your code, and before you step away, asking yourself if you've done a good job with it from a cleanness perspective is probably a good place to be at. But specific tools, specific buzzwords, I would ignore all of that for now. Don't bother with specific interface stuff or design patterns. Just learn to reason about and care about the quality of the code you're producing.
Yep, very good advice. And Clean Code is a great book. Somebody mentioned down in the comments or chat that they're watching the videos on it too, which is there's a ton of stuff out there. If you look at Bob Martin's Clean Code videos, you can, if you prefer video format and lectures, you can go through and learn pretty much. I think he's probably talked through everything in that book many, many times online too. You can learn all that stuff there, but it's it was the best book that I've read for code stuff.
And if you are like me and voraciously trying to cover as much of this content as possible, if you felt like you can't find his elaboration on those topics, his actual channel, cleancoders.com, his website, has a series of videos that aren't anywhere else. That is a paid service. They're about $14 each per video, and he spends like 2 hours per principle. And goes into absolute vivid detail. So if there's a particular thing you're confused about or a particular concept, you can find it. I've watched literally hundreds of hours of that stuff. And that's bigger deep dives than you could even ask that you ever even want to know. So that's an option if you want to really go down that road. But like I said,
I've done that too.
Steer clear. Yeah, I'd say steer clear unless you're already at the point that you feel comfortable applying them, but you don't know if you're applying them correctly. That's where I would move to that stuff. Otherwise, move on and just like learn other stuff instead.
Yeah, It's good stuff, and the videos on there are really good. So I definitely check some out if you're into that kind of stuff, or if you get bored like me and just want to look at something interesting and see some more stuff he's got to teach. He teaches a lot of stuff, and he's really great at it. So there was a question about the editor tutorial or editor window tutorials, and somebody had mentioned that Freya has some. I haven't seen those ones specifically, but I was curious if you've seen hers.
Yeah, Freya's are great. There's Freya's content is fantastic. Like it's just like 7 hours of just laborious detail on going through Unity editor stuff. Although, admittedly, it suffers from the same problem that we have, which is they're mostly live streams with 4 hours content. And if it was a structured tutorial, would be about 30 minutes or 40 minutes of very dense content, but it's kind of littered out throughout the streams. So it is a time investment. But as somebody who's written an entire like shader forge asset in Unity with Unity's rendering stuff, she knows what she's talking about. And that stuff, there's a lot of very interesting insights there. So I would say if you're learning that stuff, it's a valuable resource. But if you're in a hurry and you want to just get it done, Cat-like coding has a quicker kind of gets you started with editor tooling. It's just you're not going to learn the nuances of someone who did it like as a professional asset that you will from Freya's stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch hers on that. I haven't seen that. Go check it out. There was a comment, nothing like a junior position asking 5 years of experience. My favorite is the ones that ask for more years of experience in a product than it's been in existence for.
Yeah.
Like, I want 20 years of Unity experience. Or like 10 years of the new C# that just came out.
It's funny how there's more than one example out there on the internet of people who have been declined for a job when they were the creator of the library that the job is asking for help from. Like that has happened at least 3 or 4 times to the point. Like that's insane that we live in a world where someone could say, "I'm sorry, we want someone with 5 years experience," and it's like, well, actually, I made this 4 years ago, so that's impossible.
Yeah, you gotta love that. Here is a question about I understand Unity UI and C# and some C++, but I have a hard time getting a game done, essentially with vectors and 3D math and stuff that they really don't understand. I have not run into this problem where I had a hard time finishing a game because of math or 3D math at all. Like usually when I've run into these problems, like we talked about earlier, you just do a little bit of searching and find a solution for it. Have you ever like come to this problem where like you're just you've met people or seen projects that were having a hard time getting done because of the math problems related?
I'm curious from Andrew's perspective here because as like not a programmer initially, I'm curious if this feels like a gate that you have to fight against.
Absolutely. Some of my biggest roadblocks have been with, the difference between a quaternion and a Euler stuff and figuring out, was the gimbal thing where somebody flips around to the other side and like, what the hell?
Gimbal lock, yes.
Gimbal lock. And I'm like, that has been the biggest headache. And this is where I go back to saying, earlier we talked about writing comments down, because once I figured out what something kind of is working, if I want to, my player's facing this way, I just need to turn left when I press left, but it's not turning left. Why is it not turning left? It's such a simple problem, such a difficult solution for somebody who doesn't know the geometry and even some of the concepts about why you need to do a dot product here and all this other stuff. And then you see, you can Google solutions to these problems, but if you don't understand what you're looking at,
what the question you're asking is,
and especially when you then plug that in, you're like, it still doesn't work. Why isn't it not work? Did I find a wrong answer, or am I just reading it wrong? So for me, this has been one of the biggest roadblocks, points of roadblocks.
I would say I'm oddly enough in the opposite camp, but only not because of the code stuff at all, because I still have trouble with this stuff. I really want to make it clear. I every time I have to do anything more than a simple rotation, I will Google quaternion stuff. Like I know there's smooth damps and lerps and all these cool, like for example, something that I did over the weekend, just on Friday evening, I think maybe. I had a gun and I wanted a gun sway, where you walk and the gun sort of moves by itself relative to your motion. I was like, that's what I want. I know I have to mess with quaternion somehow. I know I probably want to use smooth damp or something like that. I don't really know the exact calculation stuff I want to do. Google's your friend, right? Like even I'm still looking up that stuff. And I found a great tutorial series on it that covered that topic. So I still do the same thing. But I will say, as far as the completing project side of it goes, that doesn't bother me because, like I said, I very clearly delineate between a project I want to complete and stuff I'm doing for learning. And because for my day job, I finish other people's projects, I make their projects work. For my side projects, I tend not to make things. I just tend to learn things. So I do it for my own edification rather than a goal to make. So anything I've ever wanted to make, I've finished and made. I just don't really want to make much because to me, I'm more interested in the learning process, and I get that satisfaction by being part of other people's projects. So I don't really need to make my own very often.
Yeah.
Here's a question that popped up for Jason's story here. On I think it's kind of just a follow up on your question about about the game stuff earlier, but they're asking about what we think about monetizing in-game assets. So like having the assets actually, basically like microtransactions and purchases and stuff. And we were talking about single player games and multiplayer games and all that kind of stuff, like, and the add-ons and you're talking about the ads at the beginning of the menu, right? Like,
Yeah.
what do you got? Like, what's your general thought? Like, I've never been a big fan of microtransactions and upsells in the games in general. Like, I'm okay with it with skins because I think League of Legends numbed me to it. But overall, like, I've never been a fan of it personally. I don't like putting it into games. I don't like seeing it in games. But I understand the reason for it, especially on free games. Like free to play games, I totally understand it and I expect it. It doesn't bother me at all. But the second it's a paid game, I just don't. I'm not a fan. What do you guys think, though?
Yeah, I mean that if it's a paid game, I can understand. 2 years down the line, some new thing comes out to add on to the game, change it up. Sure, but if it's a type of thing where it's built to be monetized, so that what you're really buying, you end up buying a not beta version, but you buy a MVP
or part of the game, right?
Yeah, they exclude stuff that they know they're going to add in, and this is what happens, I'm sure, because they have the 5-year, 6-year, 7-year roadmap. They exclude things that are going to be part of the game in 3 or 4 years, but they pace it out so that they can monetize it. It doesn't sit completely well with me, especially if it makes the first version of the game not as good. And if they're going to be pushing it, nonstop in your face, like buy this, and if it's pay to win, then I don't like it at all. At all.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm conflicted as time went by because I became more involved in the game making scene than I was as a game player. I would say I despised all forms of in-app purchasing or monetization before, mostly because the way I approach games is pretty straightforward. It's, to me, I'm paying for an experience. I'm paying to have an experience. That's what it's for. I want to be amazed, or I want to be relaxed, or I want to enjoy something, or I want a story told to me that wouldn't be told in any other form factor. I am paying for an experience. And if you add more experience, you can charge me more. If you're not adding experience and you're just changing colors or unlocking something, then you're not giving me more, so I'm not going to pay for that extra thing because that doesn't mean much to me. Now, it does for some people, that's fine. Now, that being said, I'm now more aware, though, that there's a million hidden costs to game development that start to add up. And there's a reason why, again, I don't want to go through the whole thing again, but you do a Kickstarter campaign, 30% of your revenue goes away, you put it in Steam, another 30% of your revenue goes away. And so I'm now a lot more empathetic to the fact that you put 3 years of your life into a project, and it's already a risk whether it's going to break even. After all of those cuts are taken away, I see why people do it. But for me, it comes down to the question of how do you monetize in a way that lets your audience engage if they want to without having it negatively affect the experience. So this may be a weird example, but my favorite form of monetization is in fighter games. If you have your standard Street Fighter or whatever else, and they have that option where you can pay to unlock all the characters. Some people might think, ugh, you're just paying to have the game played for you. So okay, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is if you're somebody who wants to play with their friends and you've got a 9 to 5 job, you're busy all the time, but you have a couple of hours on the weekend and you want to play Street Fighter with your friends, having an upsell of additional cost to allow you to avoid the
hundreds of hours of grinding required to unlock all the characters so you and your friends can play is a completely separate thing that doesn't affect 90% of players, adds benefit to a small percentage of players, and everybody wins, and it's additional monetizing route. So if it's stuff like that, which is affecting the gameplay in no conceivable real way, but lets people enjoy the game differently, that's all fine by me. The problems I have, and even skins and things, that's why I don't like that stuff as much. But I don't mind. Like if there's paid skins, that's fine. Now, loot boxes, different story. If you're making me gamble to buy stuff, you can go fuck off. I hate that. If it's actually buying outright skins, I don't mind that, because it's up to you whether you want to do that. But it's as Andrew was saying, if it affects the gameplay, then I'm out. Like I think that's and also it's not even about stuff that affects the gameplay by like giving people more abilities. That's the other thing too. If your game gives you a special weapon for pre-ordering, then do yourself a favor and don't do it. Because what you're doing is they've actively altered the entire arc of the game, that you will have less fun playing it because they've given you a more powerful weapon than the game was originally spec'd to play with. So fight your instinct to get any of those like bonus powerful armors and things at the start, because that's actively going to ruin your own experience with the game. So anything which affects it like that, I personally hate.
I think that's generally a consensus for most of us, though. There was a question about any cool new trends in indie games in terms of gameplay, genre, etc. that we've seen or noticed popping up. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen anything super new. It seems like big multiplayer stuff is still very big, and shooters have made they just stayed giant forever. Like it's weird. It seems like shooters are big, but they've always been huge. And the multiplayer stuff, but I don't know. Nothing really stands out personally. What about you guys? You guys probably have a better insight on this. I wish Salim was here. He'd have lots of ideas too, I'm sure. You guys any thoughts on like new trends that are interesting or coming out that you've seen, or something that you find unique?
I don't pay too much attention to games, unfortunately. Though I did see a video about a game coming up called Stray. I don't think it's fully independent. I don't know who's making it, but
that's the cat one, right?
The cat one, and I thought that was tremendously interesting. Just the idea of being a cat and playing as a cat versus as a human or other common character, and it feels like it looked like the sense was you're going to feel like a cat rather than a cat that walks like a human or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to keep an eye out. I know like battle royales were the last big one that really popped into my head that I was thinking of, which made me want to make the RTS battle royale style thing. I mean, I've been wanting to do that since a long time, 20 years ago, but there was no way that I could do it back then. And now I could actually realistically get the project done. So I'm kind of excited. There was a question here from Paul about Discord access for the Ultimate Game Dev course. It's in the resources section. I'll send out another email later today with that to everybody who's just joined. So there's a resources section in the architecture course. It's right there at the top, the Discord link and Q&A links and a lot of other things in there. Let me see.
Actually, funny enough, on the cat thing, this is the fun bit of advice. Here's a tip directly out of David Whaley's GameDev Unlocked, or is it Full-Time GameDev? Those two courses, I always get the names mixed up. His thing, he made a very good point, which is he made a game about a fox, and he said there's an extra benefit to that which people don't really think about, which is there's really engaged fox audiences, people who just love the animal and will engage with anything fox related. And if you're making a fox related game, you have an entirely separate avenue with which to advertise your game to people who just want to engage with that as a fox. And so it's actually a good bit of advice to, like one of the comments said there, I was sold when I saw the cat. It's like, well, you won't be the only one. There's a lot of people who will just be like, oh, a cat. And that's why they'll want to play it. And so it's actually worth thinking about from a genuine marketing perspective. Is there an angle that you can engage with people who like birds and then make a flying game or whatever? Like you're actively, you can market to the kind of audience who like trains, another one. Like, are half the people who play Train Simulator actually into games, or are they into trains, right? Like, where's the line on a lot of this stuff?
It's a damn good point. And I would bet that most of them are into trains and not so much into games. It's probably like an 80-20 there. That's a good point. I wonder how many cats. Seems like it would be a lot of people. So if the game's good, be loaded up. Way too many people like cats.
I've heard they're popular on the internet.
Oh, really? What's this internet thing?
I've heard.
I don't think that's going to be big, though. I'm pretty sure that internet thing is going to go away one day.
Yeah,
I like to go in there and type at www. Just
I have a quick comment here because it's kind of an interesting one. This is just it hits something reference to me personally. Mr. Bubbles has referenced Anna Perna's game Outer Wilds 2. Now here's the thing, just a complete side note. I think it's an interesting concept. I tried Outer Wilds for the first time this weekend. And I heard what it was. I never really played it. It felt like it would match my style of game a lot because I really love anything to do with time or any of that stuff as a concept. And I started playing it, and I got about an hour and a half in, and I just immediately went, "Oh, I get what this is. It's really clever. I like the look of the game. It's gorgeous, but it's a puzzle game, and I now understand what the puzzle is. I would just now have to try to solve it." And I went, "I don't have time for this. It's too big. Like it's a multi-planet spanning puzzle game." And I just immediately felt exhausted. And that was kind of disappointing to me personally, is that even though I get the game is great and I fully would recommend it to other people to play, that kind of shows there's a different audience for people based on point in their life or what they're doing. I look at that and I can fully reason that it's a good game, but I just don't have the time and mental energy to be solving a time-based multi-planet hopping puzzle thing at the moment, which is this large, expansive thing. In contrast, I did finish a game a couple days ago called Death's Door, which is a nice 6 to 7 hour little Unity game where you play as a crow and you go and fight some monsters in like an isometric Dark Souls. Nice, straightforward, simple progression, and that game suited me exactly what I wanted. And so it's just funny to say how I can fully accept that it's a good game, but it was just too much for me at this stage of my life.
No, it's a good point. I think there are a lot of games that are out there that are great things that I would think like in concept I'd love to play them, and then I sit down and like an hour in I'm like, all right, I've got to do some other things now, and I can't get back into them. Like things that take a long set of concentration and stuff, or just solving big problems like that. I struggle with it too. I like things where I can get in and play for like half an hour to an hour and then wrap it up and then not have to think about it again because too much stuff going on. But I do want to try that out though. I just pulled up a video of Outer Wilds. I was like, oh, this actually looks kind of fun. I'm gonna have to check this one out. Try it out later. I wanted to hit this question on Epic and adding support for C# to Unreal, and just kind of briefly explain why that is unlikely to ever happen. So right now, like, if you write game code, you're usually working in either Unreal or Unity, or like the two top ones. And Unity supports C# for all of the scripting. All of the code that you write in your game is in C#, but the engine itself is in C++. And the stuff that it's compiling down to is kind of a mix there. It's actually going to something to get maximal performance. And I guess the real thing here is, though, that the reason that Epic's not going to start supporting C# is that there's really not a benefit for them. They've already got their own scripting setup in there, and they've got C++ in there as like the fallback. So you can use blueprints, use the visual stuff, and I think they've got what was the scripting language in there called? I forget the name of it.
They used to be Unreal Script. I don't know if that's still a thing.
Yeah, you could use that too and code stuff, and it's kind of like their mid layer, and then you get down to the C++ to do the more low level stuff, or depending on your game, your whole game might be written in the C++ layer, just kind of extending and overriding the existing Unreal stuff. There's not a real reason for them to switch over to adding C#. It would be essentially like a giant rewrite of the engine for a performance loss. It would confuse their existing user base, and there's no positive for them. With Unity, they started off with their own custom stuff. They weren't doing C++ available, and they had, what was it, Boo was the first one as their scripting language, and then they added in the Unity script, which was like a JavaScripty one, and then the C#, and then realized that C# was kind of the best one, or the best option there, and stuck with that. And I think that it made sense because that was the natural progression of it there, and it kind of fit in. Does not make sense for Epic to just go slap it in there, and it again, they just wouldn't get anything out of it. So that's why. That was all. Can you be a good Unity programmer if you've never learned to code before? Yes. You can definitely learn to code, learning games and learning Unity stuff as your first code, without a doubt. I've seen people do it. I've seen a lot of people do it. A lot of the Unity developers I know started only doing Unity stuff, and most of them have branched out a little bit and learned some other things, either learned a bit of Unreal or learned some web stuff or enterprise things that they can use to kind of extend their skills. But a lot of the developers I know have started just with Unity or just with Unreal, and that's what they learned. They know how to code, and they're professional developers. So there was a super chat from Nicholas. Death Store deep dive. I had to pop this one up.
Hey, gladly. I'm more than happy to go on a rant about this game because it was great. It was a fun little experience. So if you haven't heard it, it's a brand new, well, pretty new. I think it's only out like a couple of weeks now, isn't it? I'm not entirely sure. Released 20th of July. Yeah, okay, so pretty close. It's by a company, Acid Nerve developer. Yeah, and it's what's funny is I'd never seen it before. I saw Nick actually streaming it, and that's when I first saw it and went, well, I'm going to give this game a try. And when I first launched it, I was really surprised to see it was Devolver Digital, and then I'm like, okay, I know I'm in for a good time here because they know how to pick good games. Every time you see the Devolver Digital logo, you know that they've partnered with somebody good. I really enjoyed that game because to me, it had a very sort of solid mission statement. A lot of games, we talked before about how games add too much crap to it that don't really add to the game or add to the story or what they're doing. This game, out the gate, you know what it is. You're a little Grim Reaper who happens to be a crow, and you're going around to these little places and you're killing creatures in this sort of vaguely Dark Souls-y vibe, in this isometric view with this sort of slightly whimsical, it's got a Wheel of Time-ish vibe to it. And it's great. Like my one complaint would be, so I'll kind of go through. My favorite thing about it is a roguelite that is very clinically hitting all the right notes. So what a lot of roguelites do wrong is they you get lost, or the gating is wrong, or the weight of where certain gameplay lands is wrong. But what this game does is, it over time you gain new abilities that do the correct thing, which open up other areas of the map. And my personal favorite mechanic in any roguelite style game is there are things in early areas you can't engage with yet. There are symbols on the wall or things that you're like, that's important, but I can't do anything with it right now. Until later on in the game, you unlock something, and then it's up to you to go, aha, now I can break those walls, I can engage with those symbols, I can activate those doors, or whatever it is, and you can now go back, and it sort of recontextualizes older spaces. So I really enjoyed that game because I got to run through it, keeping a mental note of other things to get back to, and then go back over. And again, I got like a 92% completion rate in the game because I love hunting down those little hidden things. The problem is, though, that can get very formulaic, and that is the one issue with the game. Yes, it is Metroidvania, I should have said, not roguelite. I guess I had that stuck in my head because of the progression continuation, but no, it is actually Metroidvania. But all those terms mean the same thing in my own head. They get confused. Yes, Metroidvania-ish, not roguelite. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, I think it's a really good game. It's short. It's like I said, 6 to 10 hours to complete the whole thing. But to me, that's perfect time frame. That's exactly what I want. And the art style is cute. It's a nice little fun thing. It doesn't have enough weapons and upgrades for me. I think the weapons and upgrades felt a little bit weak. Like, not weak in terms of they didn't impact the gameplay experience. Like, there was no way for me to kit into a different style of play. You play the game the way the game is intended to play, and that to me is a big limiting factor. I like when a game lets you choose. Do you want to play it? Like, for example, if you play Dead Cells, you can play Dead Cells a million different ways. You can either build into shields or build into sword, whatever, or Hades. Using one different weapon versus another vastly changes the gameplay. And the umbrella. The umbrella is just the hard mode challenge. If you start with the umbrella and you finish the entire game and never use any other weapon, then you get an achievement for it. And that's kind of my point. That's all it is, and it doesn't give you anything. It's kind of a disappointing example of it's a cool idea, but it just doesn't. There's no benefit to you to do it, really. Anyway, so I quite liked it. I recommend it. It's cheap and it's a good experience, and it's made in Unity, which I always think it's good to to rep the team. And also, I did, as I said, I decompile every game I played. So I decompiled the code, had a look, and it's not too bad. It's relatively well written. Now, they didn't use namespaces correctly, as previously mentioned, but yeah, other than that, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. I was watching the video on it. It looks pretty interesting. It looks like a fun little game. I'll try it out and see.
Yeah. They do a really good job with meaty attacks. I think that's one thing that really sells games like that. There's some really nice. Every hit has this satisfying feel to it, and as you get later on more powerful attacks, it does feel good. The problem I had though was just there's like 5 weapons in the game, and they're all interchangeably the same thing. They don't affect the gameplay in a way that I would really like. Yeah. Oh, and Titan Souls was by the same people, actually. Yeah, so.
There was a question here about polishing a game, or it popped into my head because of the 90% thing. But it said, "Can we talk about actually polishing a game? It's where 90% of the time goes. It's the second 90%. That's after like you get the game 90% done, and then you got to do the other 90% of polishing it." So yeah, and then essentially just a little bit of talking about that. I think there were a couple more about down below about starting a bunch of games. Yeah, basically I have a bunch of different demos, but never find the time to actually go through and finish and polish up the game and get it done. And I mean, for me, a lot of the time, it's not something that I end up doing solo, like actually polishing the thing and getting it ready for release. Almost always I'm working with a game designer to do that too. Like the code part, I'm polishing up and fixing things and adding in the functionality and stuff. But when it comes to tying the things together, making everything look right, act right, and feel perfect, most of the time that's when I've got a game designer working with me that's taking on the majority of that workload so that I can do the code stuff instead. Because I could spend forever polishing things up, making it all perfect and work together right, setting up my events and timing and everything right. But getting that done and doing the code just takes too much time. So a lot of time I'll have game designers help me with that. But I was curious what you guys do like for actual game polish. Like, do you polish along the way? Do you do your first 90% and then your second 90% is the next second half of the game development, or what do you generally like to do for that, or getting it done so that you don't abandon it, I guess, or whatever? I don't know. Thoughts?
When I made my first big project, the Barbarian, I think I did it wrong. Where I would start with a level and building out a world, and I expanded on that, and it worked. But I went back over and over. For me, the first 90% was followed by the second 90%, followed by the third 90%. But going back then to the second 90% and taking a different direction. So there was a whole lot of that. I think the approach I'm taking right now is to get the basic systems working to where I feel like, okay, the entire game can be made based on this stuff. I'm sure I'll add more as we go along, but I've got the whole game made before I really do any work on level design, before I do any work on any of the stuff that in the past bogged me down and got me stuck, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I think a lot of the time, in my experience, like I find that people want to knock out a vertical slice of stuff, especially when they're working on a small team of things. There's always this strong push to make a slice of the game that's like this fully polished, fully functional little bit of the game. But it almost never ends up going well. It usually ends up being like a partially polished, partial part of the game that gets redone many, many times instead, which is kind of like what you're saying. You do that level and you keep redoing it and reiterating it and reiterating it and never get the actual game done. And I'm a big fan of the opposite too, of build out all the core systems, get the key parts done, and then start polishing it up. Polish a little bit along the way to make sure that things are working, that you've got the right hooks and that it's possible. You're not coding yourself into a nightmare, but hit it later on in the process and not try to keep constantly iterating and improving polish. But I'm curious what Jason's thoughts are, because he makes very beautiful polished things all the time. So what do you think?
Well, I'm biased from the perspective that I'm a system designer by trade. So my instinct is to cut a small chunk out of a larger project and start with incrementally do that cycle in a smaller scope. So for an example, if I'm doing a UI for something, I will put some rectangles down, I will drop a Unity slider on it, I will make the Unity slider go up and down, I will then go into Photoshop, I will then make a real slider, I will import the textures, I will then upgrade it, and then when it's done, I will then do the final steps of adding animations and all of that fun stuff. But I'll do that as one cycle. So I won't. I agree with you in terms. So I think there's a delineation to be made between two types of systems. There is standalone systems and there's systems which are systemic. And so what I mean by that is I can make a UI and I can leave it as a boring, just basic default text UI, or I can add some cool bouncy animations and whatever else. And I can do that and it won't have a negative impact on anything else. For the most part, if I design my code well enough and I decide to have a cool bouncing animated bar and I later on change to a heart-based health system or something, it's not a whole lot of extra work, but it means I will enjoy using my project day to day more if the health bar is like cool and animated. Now, in contrast to that, level design is one you brought up, Andrew, and I think that's a really big deal. Level design is intrinsically tied to your character controller. And as you change things as subtly as how big of a jump arc is going to be, or what the jump parabola is, or how fast a character walks, all of that will affect the game feel of the level design. And so if you sit there and design the perfect level and then finish it up and model it and whatever, you're screwing yourself, because later on you might realize the game feels a little too fast or a little too slow, or you'd like the turn radius to be more, or you've suddenly decided that a hook shot is the most valuable mechanic in your game because it was meant to be a side thing, but you've added it and it's so much fun, it's now taken up more priority than you thought. And every previous level is now screwed because it was built without the hook shot in mind, and you have to go back to the drawing board. So I would say for tightly connected loops, systemic stuff, you want to have a white box version almost from start to finish. You want to have, can I run from the start to finish of my level, jump and do all the various character movements, and you polish up the movement and then the general blocking layout as much as you can. And then once that's solid, only then do the polish phases. But for things like UI animations, or if you know your character is going to have a run or going to have a slide, feel free to polish up the slide animation, because it'll mean you'll hate your project less. Because otherwise what happens is you get into this territory where you keep seeing this white box thing and you start to hate your own projects. It feels like it's not making progress. So you're allowed to make little wins in terms of polish where possible. Like adding camera shake isn't going to take a whole load of time, but it can really make things feel better. Or post-processing. I will add post-processing. The minute I put 3 white boxes in a scene, I will say, now let's add a bit of bloom and put on a vignette, because it takes a few minutes and it immediately makes it feel like it's more polished. And so I'll take the wins where I can so that I stay engaged in my own project. But I will be hyper aware that if something is liable to cause changes, not to over engineer effort in that direction.
I like the idea of having those. I think you talked about it before, having those on a list of just stuff to hit when you're kind of stuck too. So you hit a break point where you're not sure what to do next or having a hard time doing something. You just need to do something that's low brain power. You can get in and start doing some of the polishing stuff, and it tends to be easier and a good easy wins, like you mentioned.
UI animations are great for that. Like I absolutely love, I put some boxes down and I turn them on and off with the game object. And at some point later, it will be a canvas group. I will be using the animation curves from Material Design as recommended by Google, which have a particular curve which looks like a sine ease, but has a, like, I'll go through all these like little tweaks, but I'll do that when I want to take my brain off the horrible math problems and take a deep breath and just make something. In fact, actually, I'll show you this as a good example. This is like 100% an example of literally me doing this problem. So I was working on a multiplayer system, and the multiplayer system was for a big VR project, whatever. It's not really that important, but I'll just show you this. This is the starting point as an example. So the real project is actually like vastly different visually, and it's VR and everything else, but I don't code that way. I always make a sample project because it's fast to iterate on. I don't need to put on the headset and whatever. Anyway, my point is, this is a little environment room in Photon where I was demonstrating to a client that we have 4 characters moving in a scene, right? And then the way we're doing the lobby and the connection thing is we need to have a pin code that someone types in to take ownership and become the owner, and then they can do all sorts of various different things. Now, I was getting really frustrated with networking at this stage. I needed a brain break from all of this damn, networking code. And so I gave myself a quick win and I said, let's make a pin code. But rather than just a normal pin code entering thing, I went overboard and I went an over the top pin code thing because it was relaxing, it was fun, and it let me sort of enjoy the process a bit more. So I made this as like here's what I ended up with. And again, so unnecessary for the actual work being done, but it made me feel better about taking a break from all of the other stuff. So here's an unnecessarily over-engineered pin code, but like it was a way to kind of relax from the other stuff I was doing, and it's kind of lets you see all of the different solutions. And then finally, once I had that and I had my break, I popped it back in, and then you end up with a result which has the pin code in it, and then lets you take ownership of the actual project. So that's like literally my process of when I have small wins for optimization or not.
Let's watch this one in action. It loads up.
So, yeah. So this is just the same thing, only now the pin code is in, so you kind of see the basic flow. Now the real one, this is actually, again, it's a VR project. The pin code is on a phone. You type on the phone with your hand, but that's irrelevant for testing. For testing, it's considerably faster for me to just do this on my own machine.
Yeah. Where do we see the pin code on this one? Right at the end after they're all in?
Yeah, it should be.
There it is.
So one person typed it. So there you go. It's not, again, not the most exciting thing in the world, but it lets people take turns to take ownership, and I just double check that all the network traffic works as expected, and the photon views change ownership as an expected way to change.
You just pop that in. Exactly the kind of thing though. Like you get bored or need a little break and need to do a little polish and make a pretty little UI like that. It's cool. It looks neat. Let's see. Were there any other questions you guys wanted to hit? I think there were a couple. Let me hit just a couple of these real quick. The best way to structure an inventory: list, linked list, array, a vector. Probably an array. Depends on your scenario specifically, but assuming that it's a static size of an inventory and it's not changing, an array, if it's going to change, then a list. Right. Those are pretty much. Go ahead.
I would say my sort of less helpful answer is the correct way to structure an inventory is an inventory. And what I mean by that is you make a class called inventory, and you have an add to and remove from method. And internally, the answer is whatever the hell you want. You start with an array or start with a list, and then as your game scales, if you have issues, if you find out that you're adding to an inventory more often than you're searching for it or whatever, you can choose a different method of a collection internally. So the problem a lot of people make is they store their inventory in directly an array or list, and then they have to rewrite the entire code every time they need to change between the two types. If you put that in a class called inventory, you can ask this question later. You can decide to switch to a graph database or to whatever you want, and it's not going to impact the contract you've made with the rest of your system. So the best way to structure it is with an inventory.
Without a doubt, yeah. For some reason, that just kind of flew right over me. I assumed that by default. Yes, so have an inventory. Inside it, have an array or a list of something probably to start. And then if you need to change it, you can change it. It could be a list of item instances, items, or some other type of data, depending on how you structure it. It's something that I work on in the architecture course, actually, and just have a reference to scriptable objects and store them off by name and serialize that out and reload them back in. But yeah, definitely have an inventory class and manage that.
On that note, Bubbles there has asked a question that kind of highlights this, and it's probably worth mentioning this one. Is there any reason to use one over the other, lists or arrays? There is, and I think it's a very interesting thing to note because a lot of people, I don't think, realize the difference between the two. So what is the difference between an array and a list? Well, here's the first thing. A list uses an array. So internally, how a list works is using an array. Now, the difference is when you make an array, it has to be fixed size. You have to say, this array has 10 things in it. And so that's great if you know how much is going to be inside of a list or inside of an array. A list, on the other hand, doesn't force you to set the size. Now, why? Well, how, more a question, I guess, is because internally it has an array. And what it does is every time you're about to hit the boundary of the end of the array, it will internally copy the contents into a double-sized array. So what is the difference between a list and an array? A list is literally an array that self-sizes whenever you hit the boundary. It will double its size internally every time. Now, that means if you have a list and you're going to put 1,000 items in it, creating an empty list and adding 1,000 items is going to cause constant array resizes internally every time you hit 4, then 8, then 6, and you go up that way. So what you want to do instead is if you know your size of the array, or even a list, even if it's a list, you want to say, I'm putting 1,000 items in here, at least start it roughly at 1,000 as your capacity size. Lists also have a capacity you can set, which is the default array size.
And
but
that's in the constructor, right? You just pass it as a
yeah.
constructor parameter.
So the short answer to your question is, if you know the exact size of the contents, always use array. If you don't know the size, use a list. Or if you can manage it yourself and you don't mind null exceptions, you can make an array of a larger size than you need and manage it yourself. But the whole point of a list is so that you don't have to do that. You don't have to worry that you have a bunch of empty slots that may or may not be filled in. So.
Yeah, my general rule is that if I'm not going to resize it and it's going to be a static number of things, I'll use an array. Otherwise, I'll use a list just by default. If there's a performance reason that I need to switch from my list to an array, I will. But that's happened maybe like once in my life where it actually was, switching from a list to an array actually made a technical difference. Most of the time, the data in them is relatively small and doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say, yeah, go ahead.
But I can't stress enough that any collection type, whether you're talking arrays or lists or linked lists or dictionaries or whatever, they are tools. They are data structured tools to solve a problem, which is storing a bunch of items and referencing them. And each one has different costs or benefits in terms of lookup costs versus iteration costs versus whatever it is you're doing for your log notation. And I would say the biggest problem people make is trying to answer that without knowing the actual question they're asking. Like, you don't know yet whether it's going to be better for your thing to be sorted in advance or whether it's going to make more sense to use a graph database or a grid or whatever. So the question is, why should you try to pick one or the other? Like, instead, figure out what the contract is. In my case, I almost always make some class, and you saw this in the example the last day with potions. I have flags, I have stats, I have enemies, I have NPCs. I'll make a class called that, and that thing will be an IEnumerable of type whatever that is, and then it'll have an add function to add new items to it. Then later on, if I decide, oh, hang on a second, turns out most of the time I'm getting my index, I will internally switch to a structure that has an efficient lookup for get by index. Or if it turns out that I'm predominantly using it like a stack, where I'm mostly adding things and taking things off again, well, it's like, well, I don't need a list then, I need a stack. So I internally change it to a stack. And I can then get the performance gains after the fact by just exposing the contract of what I actually use. So I would say these are important questions and you should know the answers to them. But you don't, the real trick is hiding is giving yourself the ability to make the decision later. So the defer decision making is generally the principle that Uncle Bob talks about a lot, which is all you know for certain is what is an inventory. It's a thing that you can add to and you can remove from and maybe iterate over. And if you make a script that does those three things, you can later on decide which is the most performant solution to solve that problem. But that's not a decision you have.
No, you cut out. I think it's not a decision you need to make early on, and when you've got it in that inventory, you can just kind of swap it out. There you go, you're back.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's I'd say great advice in general. Just abstracting that stuff away and then putting it in. And one of the benefits, if for people who are thinking like, well, why don't I just go back and change it later? I'll use an array and I'll just swap it later. But if you're not doing what Jason's recommending there of like actually creating the inventory object in class, you've got to do it in a dozen places or maybe 100 places or who knows, depending on how big your project is. If you're just calling inventory.add item and inventory.remove, you've got to do it in one or maybe two spots there because it's basically in your inventory class. So I'd say it's just generally good advice to make classes, abstract that stuff, and hide it away. And sorry, I may cut you off, but you disappeared for a second.
No, that's fine. Like you correctly, you finished my sentence perfectly. That's great. And just to kind of tie onto that, because Surprise Pikachu asked a question there that extends onto that. Would it be a good idea to make anything to put there? Would it be able? Okay, here we go. Would that be a good idea to be able to put anything into inventory, or should you make a generic structure? Well, here's the thing. If you try to make a generic structure, you'll do it wrong because you don't have a generic problem to solve yet. Like, how do you solve the theoretical generic answer to 5 questions you haven't asked yet? That seems like an odd question to try to solve. You're better off, make the inventory because you need an inventory. Then later on, you start making the enemies list or the object pool or something, and you're like, hang on a second, 3/4 of this code is the same thing. Well, abstract out the common code from the inventory, make them both inherited, and then reuse most of that code, right? Don't try to be generic from the start. Don't solve a problem you don't have. Write the code you need, and if you start writing code you need again, and it looks very similar, you now have a baseline with which to copy from.
Yeah, I think that's perfect advice. That's something that I've done before too, where I tried to pre-genericize things. It never goes right. There was a real quick question about deleting things from arrays too. I just wanted to really quickly mention that about how to delete or destroy a game object that's in an array. And I mean, you still destroy your game object the same way. You loop through, get the instance or the game object at that index and call destroy on it. But then you need to set it to null, right, to clear it out so that your null checks actually work. So you set that entry to null manually is the only real other difference, or change it to using a list, because it's not going to remove that entry. And if you want to delete an entry from an array, you've actually got to kind of copy and move all of those objects over. It's not nearly as easy. I'd probably switch to a list, because that's literally what it's there for, what it'll handle for you. Mr. Bubbles, thanks again for the super chat. Awesome stuff. And also, somebody mentioned the Vimlark hoodie. I do love this one. It's one of my favorite hoodies. The embroidery on this thing is just awesome. It makes me want to do like all embroidered hoodies, because they're really cool. The game Ultimate GameDev one is really cool too. The embroidery. I'm just a big fan of them, which is weird. I sound like a grandma talking about embroidery. But it's cool stuff. We only got a few minutes left. Did you guys want to hit a few more questions? Did you have tips you wanted to hit, or other things you wanted to jump over to?
I did have a few tips this time around. And one other thing I meant to mention as well, because it came up, we didn't really get to talk about audio as much as we mentioned at the start, but I will say about audio in Unity. Again, I take every course I can possibly find because I enjoy doing so. And one of them is there's a guy called Henry Scott, and he's got Scott Game Sounds, and he has an entire course on using Unity audio. And he's got one course on how to use the native audio tools and how to use all of the mastering stuff, and that's a really good one. And he's got a second one on Fmod and how to use Fmod with Unity. So I'd recommend checking out his stuff if you're really trying to get into audio. And in general, my recommendation is always Fmod with Unity if you're going down that road. And fun fact, that game, Death's Door, they use Wise, actually. They use Wise for their audio. As I peeked under the hood and saw, I was like, this doesn't, I don't recognize it. Oh, that's what it is, it's Wise. As for my tips, so I'm really using menu item a lot these days. And something I recommend is if you want to add your own shortcut to Unity, a kind of a hacky way to do it is to create a menu item, and you can attach a shortcut to the menu item, and that effectively gives you a shortcut in Unity to do it. So an example is, I have my validation logic, which is I use that little validator thing where I require fields and whatever. And I was in a community and somebody said to me, can you validate the fields before you press play? Now, I had it set up by default that every time you press play, it'll auto-validate the fields and then before the game starts. And I was like, that's a good point. Rather than having to press play to see if I've missed any of the fields, it would be nice if I could press a button and say, did I leave any of the fields unassigned? And so I just made a menu item using literally the menu item attribute, and I assigned Shift V to it. So anytime I press Shift V, my editor will scrub through every single game object, every single required field, and tell me if any of them are missing an entry, which is just a really nice way to solve that problem. So I guess the tip there is look into menu items, and if you want to add your own shortcuts to Unity, you can do it via the menu item system.
Can I jump in with a real quick shortcut tip before I forget it?
Because
Ian shared one earlier, and I want to just pop it up. Where's my Unity window? There we go. See my Unity window popping up. Cool. So the one that he shared earlier that I actually am going to start using was under the shortcuts section. You said shortcuts reminded me of it. So if you go to under edit and shortcuts and search here for clear all player prefs, one of the things that I do constantly is clear the player prefs to the edit window, and now I've got it bound up to Control Shift Backspace. And I realized that there's a lot of stuff in here that I didn't know I could actually bind to. Quite a few different shortcuts or things that we hook up to. Not as cool as your menu one, because menu one you could run any code you want, but I thought this was kind of neat too, and wanted to just briefly share it and say thanks again, Ian, for sharing that one earlier. Cool. All right, what's next? Give me some more cool stuff. I'm learning all kinds of things. I like this menu one though. I'm gonna start using that.
Yeah. Well, I found it really valuable because actually, can I bring up an example? Let me see if I have my thing here.
So I like using menu items all the time, and menus, and in there. It's just an attribute for everybody who hasn't used it. Use the menu item attribute over your method. And then you can put in, what's the shortcut character for the hotkey?
Oh, it depends what you're doing.
Ampersand?
It's either ampersand or it's the quote symbol. There's different ones depending whether you're using Shift Alt or whatever as your variating thing. You'll have to look it up. Basically, it's not one to I know offhand. Yeah, let me see if I can pull this up actually. I didn't have my screen ready to share, so this might take a second to pull up.
Just got to do an application share. That's why I like in Restream, you just hit the share screen button there on the bottom. You have that one, right?
Does that work?
That works too. Yeah, we can pop that up.
So basically, I added a bunch of things. Here's a couple of examples. So say I have a brand new project, nothing in it, empty scene, and I want to start making some basic stuff. What I have up here in the game object asset menu, create, under UI, I've got a bunch of things I create regularly. So a 4K canvas.
Super low res, by the way, right now. I can't read any of the text.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Well, okay, it's hard to see, but basically up here in my assets under create, I have my own. Let me see if I can bloody get the menu. I have my own submenu here on the right, and it's probably hard to tell, but I basically put in 3 different menu items. In fact, you know what? I'll take a screenshot and send it to you. It might make easier to see.
Cool. So what do the menu items do?
They create a canvas automatically for me. So what I can do is there's a couple of settings I do on a semi-regular basis. Let me just drop this into Imager. There we go to show you. So this is a default set that I have that will automatically create a canvas for me.
Okay, let's share that one instead. Do a share image of this one. Oh, okay. So you choose which canvas you want, the 4K, the HD, or the screen fader?
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, I have a bunch of other sub things. So say I go ahead and I make the 4K canvas. If I right click on the canvas, here's another set of options I have for myself. Let's see.
Get that image up.
Yeah, this is a little bit more tedious than I was hoping, but that's the unfortunate Irish internet for me. So I can do this. So I right click on my canvas. You'll see that I have a bunch of options here.
We paste that one in. Okay. Okay.
And so to world will automatically switch it to world space and drop it into the world, change the scale down, and do all of the usual stuff you do migrating a canvas from being world space to local space. Which just makes just a little thing I have to do a lot, and so it's quite handy to have that option. And then I have a bottom one there called Add Fader. Now that option is hidden unless I'm selecting a canvas. So if I have a canvas selected, that shows up. And what that does is it drops on automatically this set of scripts here under a child object. And do one last one.
Are you sharing from a different system there? Or you can't just hit screen share or share your window?
I can. I just think it would probably be low resolution, so I'm just sending you images instead. It might be easier.
Oh, okay.
Horrible internet. Yeah, that's the last one. You'll get that. That should be the rough idea. Right.
Pull this last one up. All right.
And so this is screen fader. Yeah. And so what this does is if I hit screen fader, it automatically adds a child object, which is an image, which has this applied. It automatically sets the image to be invisible from its color. It will auto-populate with a default fade color, set the default values, and then now I have this script which will fade in automatically on start. So with 3 clicks, I have a 4K UI canvas with a fades from black into the game. And that's just a nice way to start a project. And so adding these little helper things can be quite efficient. And then on top of each of those, each one of these has their own additional helper things. So this will be the last one. Let me send this last image. Where's the? Yeah, here we go. And then as a final note, that screen fader itself, if I click on it, it has keys on it. And so that's the loop, for example, of how I would be using varying levels of menu items to just automate some of these processes, right? And so now the screen fader, either the screen fade out or fade in just by right-clicking on the script. So I have a bunch of these on different components. I have one for images that if I have one for rect transforms. If I click the rect transform, it'll automatically maximize fully and set like images. Oftentimes the anchoring goes wrong, so I have a bunch of shortcuts that makes the anchoring automatically fix themselves when I right click on it. There's a bunch of stuff like that. So like if you find yourself doing something a lot, just learn. Like I learned the 3 different properties inside of rect transform, the anchored positioning and the other 2, the min and maxes and all those. And I just learned how to set them in code. And then I created a script that did it. I made the 3 templates I always use. I made them a right click menu. And now I can say pin to left, pin to center, whatever. I find myself often doing a scroll list, and it's really annoying because to do a correct scroll list in Unity, you need to have scroll rect, viewport, the content section. Content section needs a content size fitter. The content size fitter needs a vertical layout group of some kind. And then you start getting into, like, all these little pieces need to be in the right places. Now, you could make a prefab and reuse the prefab, but now you have to remember to add the prefab every time, and you have to put it in your project and reuse it, and you have to copy and paste it. Or you just make a script which will literally add each of these one by one and then build the object directly in your scene. And now you can make it a right-click menu. So you can just go right-click, create scrollable section, and it'll just drop it in for you. So not yet. These are all things on my own stuff at the moment. They're not up yet because they're mine. I'm playing with them. But if something feels good enough to add to the library, I will. And these probably will make it in because I'm using them a lot. But yeah, there is stuff up on my GitHub though. You can play with whatever's there. I'll add more stuff as I go, basically.
Yeah, and that question was, are these all included in your UI repo? Which is you do have cool stuff in there, but I assume it's coming soon. And there was another question: does Jason Story have a YouTube channel? He does. He just hasn't posted videos. So yeah, if you subscribe, you'll feel obligated to post videos. So go subscribe and leave a comment and say, "Hey, I need to see some more videos, Jason," and I'm sure he'll leave some in there.
Although I do have my own Discord though, and so if you want, head over here. And if you join on my Ko-fi page, there is there you go. If you join over there, donate anything, you'll get a link to the Discord, and you can ask me questions there. And any thoughts I have or code snippets tend to go there first. So
yeah, definitely go over there. Send Jason some coffee. I highly recommend it and joining this Discord. I need to join your Discord. I'm going to do that. I still don't talk much. I don't know. And if I'm in there, I need to be more active. I don't know. I need to be more active in Discord in general, but I need to find more time in the day too. I need to find some like 29-hour days. And I never sleep enough or have enough time to do anything. Cool. Well, did you have any last second emergency tips you wanted to drop in, or should we save them for next week?
There might be one last one. I have a look. What have we got here?
While he's looking, everybody hit the like button, subscribe, and go share the video. So that way, when it goes out for replay, lots more people will come in and see it, and we'll have more stuff to talk about. Andrew just randomly disappeared. I assume that was an accident, and he'll come back and say goodbye. I don't know. There he is.
Yeah. Anything else?
Like, I'm out. Screw you guys.
All the rest are a longer discussion. I'll save those for next time. I don't think I want to rant about some of these topics, so I'm not going to waste them in a few minutes at the end. So we'll cover those next time.
Do them as a big one. And what about you, Andrew? Anything you want to end on, leave with?
No, we got some stuff on sale, just like last week. One more week of that sale, and then nothing on sale for who knows how long. But we updated our environment pack, which is really cool, with the new models for making more dense towns. We're calling them facades because they're just the front and sides, no back, no interior. But the intent there is that you can stack them up and make more dense towns, and then create your own bespoke interiors that don't always match the size of the building. So you can kind of play with that a little bit and make whatever you need for your game. So.
That's cool. So you can actually do like a big city environment and have it be performant. Because I know a lot of time you buy like those packs, those houses and stuff, and it's all the full house and they're like 50,000 or 20,000 polys, and you're like, well, I can put some in, but I can't put very many in. So having like the facades makes a lot of sense. That's a cool idea.
It
I assume
definitely
they're super low poly there.
You'd be surprised. We're using the same meshes as the full buildings, but so it cuts out some, but it doesn't cut out all by any means, because most of the polys do come from the exterior, the roof, etc., which we can't cut out. But the intent is that you're not going to be seeing these from the sky. Like if you have a fly script in your scene, then you wouldn't be using these because character would just see all, But since you are seeing it from the front, you can cut out a lot of the interior structure. And then just it gives you more options for building out custom interiors.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
I have to check that one out. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming out here and joining us live and hanging out and chat and stuff. Make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe, and again, share the stuff because it does make a big difference, and drop a comment afterwards. There's links for all the cool stuff down below. Jason's coffee, Andrew's stuff is down there below. There's a couple course links and other stuff. Go check them all out. And I guess we'll see everybody again in a week on next Sunday. So thanks again, and bye.
Bye, everyone.
I got to find the button now. I just like slowly, awkwardly leave.